G'day, May 40 here. So I grew up in one of those rare religions that was essentially founded by a woman, a prophet, Ellen G. White, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, in which I was raised, is a very feminine environment. Women compose about two-thirds of the members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's a movement that's strongly aligned with feminine values like nurturing, strongly against a lot of masculine values such as competition. So Seventh-day Adventists tend to be knights, and they really don't like competition. That's strongly discouraged. And so it's a female, estrogen-heavy arena. And it's also kind of a microcosm for Protestant Christianity in general, which tends to be quite anti-male and quite reluctant to criticize women. And I moved through my 20s, I converted to Judaism. Thank God in Orthodox Judaism, right, is not an anti-male environment. Right? There's no notion of toxic masculinity in Orthodox Judaism. There's the recognition that men like women can behave badly, but it's a safe space for men. Right? Men can go to an Orthodox shul and they can just hang out with other men. And male virtues, all right, are celebrated, and there's not that anti-male animus and the pro-female silliness that seems to dominate the Protestant churches. So what the hell happened, and how did Protestant Christianity lose so deeply in this country? Because Protestantism initially was the major religion that best adapted to modernity. Protestantism was the religion that most influenced the United States. It was the guiding force behind our legal system, our political system, our culture, our high-trust society. Protestants are about that one rare group that doesn't tend to live through their kids. People of Northern European ancestry who tend to be Protestant are also that rare group that does not have dual values, right? One morality for how you treat members of your in-group and a different morality for how you treat members of an out-group. Right? People of Northern European ancestry, meaning Protestants, seem to be the one group that believe in a universal morality. But they're also the group that secularized the most, secularized the hardest, have been the hardest hit by the onrushing forces of secularism, and they've become dominated by feminism like other elite institutions, right? And there is a huge divide between Protestant clergy and the people in the pews, between the clergy and the laity. The laity vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. The clergy, particularly those with elite educations, are quite anti-Trump. But whatever their politics, there's a consistent thread in the main Protestant clergy that is pro-women, anti-men, and even celebrates the humiliation of men at the hands of women. I mean, even people like the famous Protestant pastor Tim Keller seem to celebrate his humiliation at the hands of his wife. And so we live in an increasingly low-trust and selfish society. And so how do you navigate it when people are so quick to share text messages, emails, where you can't trust people nearly as much, where you've got to really question how much you confide in someone, where you've got an HRification of society, where basic male instincts are wrong and women are rarely held to account. So what do we do in this sort of society where selfishness becomes celebrated, female selfishness in particular? So Renn is my new favorite thinker of the past week. He is a Christian, but not a clergyman. He's an evangelical Christian and a thoughtful conservative. He's got his latest Substack, How Modern Culture Repackages Marital Abandonment as Radical Self-Love, with little counter-narratives from religious voices, in particular Christian voices, because very rarely do you hear any major Christian voices, in particular Protestant voices, say anything critical of women.
This voiceover is AI generated. Miranda July's novel All Fours has been a sensation among middle-aged women. The New York Times wrote about how the book influenced women to rethink marriage and family life.
It's the talk of every group text, at least every group text composed of women over 40. Miranda July's latest novel, All Fours, is about a 45-year-old woman who upends her seemingly settled domestic life by checking into a motel a half hour from her house for a few weeks, taking up with a younger married man, and then experimenting with an open marriage. On her journey to self-discovery and sexual awakening, she asks women she knows to share with her their true desires. Are they happy in their marriages? And if they're not, are they going to do anything about it? What are the other possible arrangements for a life?
The book came out last May and is still huge. I just checked my local library and 127 people have holds on it. The library has 26 copies. All Fours is basically about a 45-year-old woman who suffers a midlife crisis. In the book, the narrator, married with a child, sets off on a cross-country drive from LA to New York, but never even makes it out of Southern California. She ends up checking into a cheap motel, spending $20,000 to redecorate her room, staying there 3 weeks, and becoming infatuated with the husband of the room's interior designer. By the end, she and her husband adopt an open marriage. The narrator has affairs with multiple women, and supposedly the book ends on a somewhat ambiguous note. I only read the first third of it. This is hardly the first book of its type. In some ways, it's just the new eat, pray, love for a new generation of middle-aged women. Obviously, there's a huge market for this. While the book does not directly tell women to leave their husbands, July has become an explicit advocate for that on her Substack. In a recent post, she wrote,
I do believe, and I tell this to my child, that romantic relationships are usually not supposed to be lifelong, but rather a season of a particular length, to be determined. People default to lifelong, in part because it can be really hard to trust your gut about the length of the season. Some relationships only last a few weeks, or a night, but you spend the rest of your life using things you learned from them. No length is better or more profound than any other length. Often,
you're not going to find any Christians speaking out against this, or criticizing women for this selfish attitude towards marriage.
There is a new person involved in this crisis. Indeed, it is the new person who makes it a crisis, who brings it to a breaking point. Most of the time, this new person does not endure, but they are still very significant in the story of your life. A friend of mine calls these people crowbars. They get you out. What I really think is that you are not doing it for this new person, but for this new side of yourself. The fascism of our era will make you want to batten down the hatches, not rock the boat. But I think things generally turn out better when people trust the groundbreaking.
Right, the fascism of our era? I mean, how completely ridiculous. Right, fascism was a particular time-bound response to the rise of totalitarian communism, and it existed in Italy and perhaps also in Germany and perhaps a little bit in Spain and Portugal, essentially in the 1930s, 1940s. So the idea that America is some fascist state is nonsense.
Progressive elements within themselves. There is much company on this route, whereas the more conservative path tends to become smaller and smaller until it is just you alone in a house taking care of an old man.
Portugal.
One friend had an elaborate plan designed to make her leaving the marriage more palatable and understandable to her husband. It involved several lies, and I was nodding for a while. It seemed plausible, maybe even kind. But then I remembered something. Maybe he doesn't need to understand or approve of what you're doing? Novelty helps women stay very alive, which is part of our very important purpose here on Earth. Doesn't mean you have to slut it up constantly, but the idea of one person forever was probably not...
Yeah, slut it up. Right, that's a winning message for women. Right, slut it up. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to wear really well over time. All right, first public message here from Dennis Prager, apparently.
I'm really feeling much better, as you can hear. My voice is practically normal, which is very exciting because I intend to go back on radio again. We'll release the date I think within a week, and my beloved son, one of my beloved sons, but my beloved son David, is here with me, and I can't tell you how much he has done for me.
You should try to tell them.
No, that was good. That was good. You didn't have to say you're kidding. That was very good. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. All right, everybody. Looking forward to being with you often.
He's been reading your notes and your letters and loving them.
Oh, you have no idea. I actually want them all placed in, what do we call it, the Prager Library? Yeah, I want to keep them for the rest of my life and beyond that.
Okay. That was interesting. Dennis Prager's first public comments. All right. But back to Aaron Renn and trying to understand the anti-male hostility that seems to be so endemic.
For the rest of my life. And
All right, thank you, Dennis.
Not something women came up with. Women in the comment sections of this Substack do not seem to be regretting blowing up their lives, even when they admit it was hard for a while. Look for the through line of your most inner self. What did you want for yourself when you were younger? Is it connected to what you now so problematically want? If yes, then perhaps you are not so much blowing up your life, but rather redirecting it back to its most elemental and true path. Try not to be too afraid of the mess that will come with tremendous change. It's a mess you'll become yourself through. It's important. Fear stasis and spending this one life frozen in a crouched position, not wanting to get in trouble.
I have been noting for about 3 years that there's been a recurring theme of the media glamorizing or in effect giving permission for women to dump their husbands and families for no reason beyond pure selfishness.
Yeah, this is widespread in the media. All right, Holly Rourke says we need prayers ASAP for Rodney Martin. He's in the ICU after a couple of serious surgeries. He had some seizures after a surgery. So thank you, Holly, for that update on Rodney.
We saw this in the treatment of the singer Adele divorcing her husband, in op-eds by writers like Laura Bazelon, NYT, and Honor Jones, Atlantic. This is a progression beyond simply normalizing divorce. Even in the previous pro-divorce culture, women still felt compelled to give a reason why they were dumping their husbands, something that he had done wrong. This didn't even have to be especially bad, like an affair. But there had to be some kind of negative behavior or trait of the husband to make a divorce seem socially legitimate. Today, that's not the case. The explicit message is that it's okay to divorce your husband for purely selfish reasons, even when explicitly stating that he was a good husband and father and did nothing wrong. For example, Bazelon described her divorce as a radical act of self-love of her husband.
Right, so just imagine how Christian clergy in particular would castigate this if men were doing it, right? If men were divorcing their wives as a radical act of self-love, right? The Christian clergy would be all over it, our elites would be all over it, our media would condemn it, but when women do it, it's celebrated.
Husband, she wrote,
There was no emotional or physical abuse in our home. There was no absence of love. I was in love with my husband when we got divorced. Part of me is in love with him still. I suspect that will always be the case. Even now, after everything, when he walks into the room, my stomach drops the same way it does before the roller coaster comes down. I divorced my husband, not because I didn't love him. I divorced him because I loved myself more.
July is not so much about stressing the husband's innocence, but does emphasize purely selfish reasons as a justification for leaving a perfectly fine marriage. How has the American church responded to this trend? Basically, it hasn't. I just did a web search for all fours on several leading evangelical websites, including several that extensively write about culture, and I didn't see any references to it. This shouldn't be surprising. As I've previously shown, since at least the 19th century, the church has been largely anti-male, seeing men as the author of family dysfunction and pain. As British academic Callum Brown noted, nowhere did evangelical literature have such a powerful influence in the public domain, including in secular fiction, as in its demonization of men. Newsletter number 3 was dedicated to exploring some of this history. In 2020, the feminist scholar Valerie Hobbs published a peer-reviewed study on the way conservative pastors talk about divorce in their sermons. She found,
in summary, despite the fact that femaleness was, as mentioned earlier, a significant semantic concept in the divorce corpus, women are framed primarily as receivers of divorce rather than initiators. Although in most cases of divorce in the United States, women initiate divorce, pastors in the corpus in this way represented divorce as a largely male action.
It's one of the most widely known statistics in social science.
So the New Testament castigates divorce as stemming from male selfishness. So I think that the feminine is of a higher priority in Christianity than the masculine, compared to, say, Orthodox Judaism.
That women initiate the vast majority of divorces, around 70% of them. But this is rarely ever mentioned by evangelical pastors. I have never once seen this fact in an evangelical book on marriage, even ones that are otherwise full of statistics. I should note that when men like Anthony Bradley pointed out her finding, Hobbs backpedaled and said he was misinterpreting her study. But I've read the entire paper. The framing of divorce as a male action in the sermon she studied is a clear finding. In fact, it's one of only 2 key findings in her paper. The church isn't even acknowledging the reality of who initiates divorce, much less reckoning with the new cultural messages that it's a great thing to dump even a wonderful husband and father in order to explore something new. The unfortunate reality is that American church leaders largely do not understand the cultural dynamics of today America, and certainly don't refer to or tailor their prescriptions to men to take account of them. The entire reason that I started writing this newsletter several years back was because I saw so many men turning to online influencers and the manosphere instead of the church looking for life direction. I wanted the church to get in the game and become more competitive. Unfortunately, if anything, that gap has only gotten bigger. Online influencers like George...
Right, so why do people turn to secular gurus and online influencers rather than clergy? Because the secular gurus and online influencers are doing a better job at meeting their needs, at speaking to the situations that they find themselves in, articulating their pain and their confusion.
Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, the noxious Andrew Tate, and many others ate the church's lunch. That's embarrassing. One reason is that they are attuned to these cultural dynamics men see all around them. They might not have the right prescriptions, or indeed even often have bad ones, but they at least are acknowledging in some fashion today's realities. The American church needs to update its software and start confronting today's culture. This is a lot harder to do than screaming "man up" at the men in the pews, but it has to be done. Quite apart from effectiveness, it's about being willing to speak the truth. As one example of how the secular world has more compelling answers, indeed any answer, read this piece about July from Freddie DeBoer.
Right, speak the truth. Right, when you believe in things, when you have ideological commitments, when you have ties, all right, ties bind you to other people, but they also blind you. And there is a way to get the best of both in-group identity and also to be open to truth, and that is to step outside of your group identity at times and just recognize, how would this sound, how would this look to someone who's not a part of my in-group? And let go periodically of everything that you think you know. Move from state of judgment into a state of awareness. Right? When you move into the present moment, you're just playing a game of catch. Right? You can't play a game of catch without moving into the present moment. You go for a walk, you get physical, you play sports, you move into the present moment. You'll be able to let go of much of your unnecessary body armoring and ideological armoring that separates you from truth.
DeBoer is an atheist so far as I know, and basically a leftist political writer rather than a men's influencer. But people from a range of perspectives read him because he delivers the goods. He writes,
"As I wrote recently, what media sells in 2025 is permission. That is our product." Apparently, a lot of women were waiting for a particular kind of permission that Miranda July has provided. What's remarkable about all of this cheering on of July in our most elite publications is not just its sheer volume, but also how untouched it is by skepticism or pushback. It's not just that a certain kind of person at a certain kind of publication wants this story told, they also don't want to hear anyone object to it. And I think this is the "can women have it all?" phenomenon again, where saying that a particular kind of happiness for women is genuinely unattainable is too easily represented as saying that you don't want them to attain it. Well, the news is good. They already had permission. Most of the Western, educated, liberal women who are devouring this number content have in fact had the ability to avoid or escape monogamy for their entire lives. But, again, is ought. The question is not whether women have permission to forego long-standing marriages and relationships to pursue a regular churn of sexual and romantic partners in an effort to achieve real satisfaction and happiness. The answer to that was already yes. The more relevant question is, will the women who attempt this actually achieve satisfaction and happiness? And I'm profoundly skeptical. Because life doesn't work that way. We live mundane lives in a boring existence on a finite planet. We negotiate little bits of happiness where we can find them. We never, ever get everything that we want. And we are remarkably consistent in no longer wanting what we want once.
So often, atheists are telling a lot more truth than religious people. Right? Just because someone's an atheist doesn't mean that they are automatically somehow blind to truth.
We get it. For those of us who are lucky enough not to face poverty or disability or abuse or addiction, a vague but tolerable disappointment is something like the most common state of human life. And I think Miranda July and all of these ruling class think piece peddlers are selling a lot of impressionable women on a fantasy. No different from the kid hawking crypto to gullible people eager to believe that they can get rich quick. What comes next, sooner or later, is the rug pull. When you read these endless essays, you're not hearing women say, It's true that the guys I'll be able to bag in 20 years are going to have aging spots and balls that hang down to their knees, but girl, I'll be liberated. All of this is part of a far broader denial of aging and death in our culture.
So there are certain forms of discrimination and bigotry that are not just acceptable, they are prized, elevated, honored, right? Being anti-conservative, anti-Republican, anti-male, anti-white male, anti-Christian white male, anti-straight, right? These types of bigotries tend to be often not just tolerated, but praised, honored, revered among elites, including among Christian elites and non-Orthodox Jewish elites.
It's incredible, the degree to which generally functional and successful people have completely cut off the inevitability of their advancing age from their conscious minds. There are all manner of lifestyles that are built around the pursuit of endless novelty, such as those centered on drug use, sadomasochism, extreme sports.
Women are going to be at their most attractive in their late teens, early 20s, and their power over men is simply going to decline from there. Right, a basic bitch truth about life that somehow is not considered appropriate to say in a church, for example. Right, so people can build up cathedrals against reality.
Endless travel. And what happens very, very, very often is that the pursuit of new experiences becomes in and of itself the boring slog that all of the rest of us experience too. The romantic ideal is good. It's deeply imperfect, but worth fighting for. There's a reason people come back to it, again and again, despite all the frustration. I suspect a lot of people who consider lifelong serial partnering are doing so while quietly wanting the romantic ideal, one person for life, but the pain of looking for it has driven them into rejecting it as a form of self-defense, rationalizing unhappiness. So, here's the question I'd ask Miranda July and her many middle-aged women acolytes. Do you honestly think that the last decades of your life are going to consist of moving on from ing one hunky pool boy to the other, without trouble, disappointment, or a slowly and inevitably draining sense of satisfaction with it all? Do you think that even if you can always reliably...
Look, women aren't doing each other any favors when they tell a woman who's 30, 40 pounds overweight, oh, you're looking fantastic. Or it doesn't matter if you get older and older, you'll have just as easy a time finding a man when you're 35, 45, 55, as opposed to when you're 20.
Find a new partner who you're attracted to and who is attracted to you, life will prove to be reliably satisfying, given that ultimately it's just another attempt to wring permanent pleasure out of transitory experience. I'm biased. Yes, I'm a romantic. I believe in love. One person. Acknowledging that bias, I just have to tell you, this all looks like the definition of being trapped in samsara to me, trading one form of attachment for an equal and opposite form of attachment. I know what you want it to be true, that you can simply choose to live a life of permanent novelty and support.
I remember I was dating this beautiful woman in her early 40s, and she didn't believe that her sexual allure would diminish as she ages because her mother was in her 60s, and her mother still had tremendous sexual power over men in her imagination. And the same woman was very surprised when an older man took her out to dinner, and he ostensibly did it to tap her mind about fighting for social justice, but she got to the dinner and she found out it was a date, and she was horrified to think that this older man would imagine that he would go out with her. And I thought she was incredibly naive to think that this older man would want to take her out to dinner to hear her thoughts on social justice. So, two equally deluded people.
Without commitment. I'm asking what you actually believe will be true, in the most jaundiced, hard-hearted, and self-critical way possible. We make big decisions from the cradle to the grave, but I've learned this about middle age. The bad ones matter more when we're all always running out of time.
Click over to read the whole thing.
Yeah, that's Freddie DeBoer, right? A leftist, a Marxist, probably an atheist, but also a terrific writer and public intellectual at times. So there's a word that makes me uncomfortable, all right, empowerment. Right? Whenever I hear about empowerment, it's always from the left, and it's always about empowering certain groups. So it's not about empowering men, empowering straight people, empowering Christians, empowering white people. It's always about empowering the sacred minority groups, Black, LGBTQ, etc. Right, so I'm spending much of my spare time these days reading Renn. And he's got a provocative post here from February 8, 2021. Tradcons are the enemy of the American man. So why are men turning to the manosphere instead of to church? And the Tradcon, the traditional conservative type Christian, right, is no friend of the American man. Right? They want to affirm sexual differences and retain traditional standards of behavior, but in ways that almost always reach essentially feminist conclusions. Right? So they're essentially arguing Tradcons are the real feminists. Right? So you hear so many of these people anchoring their own marriage in an act of humiliation. They will assert the moral superiority of women. They will assign total blame for family and social and marital problems to men. And they will affirm the most feminist conceptions of roles for men and women in society. And so this one particular book from a traditional Christian bloke begins with a story of how his wife, who was then his girlfriend, humiliated him at a bar. And so a lot of these Tradcons love to define their wife's superiority, just recognize that early in the marriage, and then use that as the anchor for their teachings on this subject. So Tim and Kathy Keller wrote a book on marriage, and early on they tell the story of a godly tantrum in which she smashed her wedding china with a hammer to force him to do what she wanted. Right? This was, I was a bad boy, my wife put me in my place motif. It's almost universal among Tradcons, among Christians, among Protestant clergy in particular, right? And it tends to want to establish the frame of marriage as one where the wife is the boss, the wife is in the superior position, right? The wife morally superior, that sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive, right? The same sort of arguments you get in the manosphere, right? And so from the biological, this leads to the moral. So, because of these biological facts, somehow women are just superior. So women have a superior role in the dating market. They have a special dignity. Civilization arises and endures because of women and their expectations. Men and women are not equal. He owes what he is to her. Right? So these Tradcons, they will use dignity many, many times, but they will usually exclusively apply it to women, not men. Right? Young men do not possess the natural dignity that was once bestowed upon women. And this kind of dehumanizing language about men was quite common in my Seventh-day Adventist upbringing and in many Protestant churches. And it's bogus, right? All men and women are equally created in the image of God, and their dignity derives from that. And there's a great fondness in evangelical literature in particular to demonize men, that men are the principal threat to family sanctity. Right? Our lack of civility is because of our male society's failure to recognize women's dignity. Men are not easily raised to become gentlemen. Right? We need to give more assistance to poor women. Right? All the blame for divorce and single motherhood lies with men. When the most divorces are filed by women. Right? So men do bad things, and some men abandon their families, but so do women. Some men are abusive, so do women. Right? I was smashed around quite a bit as a child by women, the women who are supposed to take care of me. And they would beat the hell out of me because they had out-of-control anger and because they could and they could get away with it. Now, I love the masculine environment of Orthodox Judaism, but even there, right, the poison of feminism is seeping in. So probably 20 times that I recall, I've been to a home where the wife, the Orthodox Jewish wife, would just publicly humiliate her husband, like with outbursts and putting him down and cutting remarks and saying, you're no good at anything and you just can't do anything right. And there's only one occasion which I remember where the man of the house humiliated his woman. So I don't know why the humiliation just seems to run in one direction from the Orthodox Jewish homes that I have seen. Right, how do we live in this lower trust America?
How to live in a lower trust nation. America is in the midst of a slow-motion shift to a much lower trust society. We see this in the decline of trust in American institutions, but it affects our personal relationships as well. The New York Times ran a front-page story on Sunday about a former friend and law school classmate of J.D. Vance who provided personal emails and texts with Vance to the Times, which wrote,
That exchange is from a series of emails between two friends, part of a close-knit group of 16 students who remained together throughout their first law school semester in the fall of 2010. As now Senator Vance seeks the vice presidency, Nelson has shared about 90 of their emails and text messages, primarily from 2014 through 2017, with the New York Times.
As I wrote before, loyalty is the coin of the realm. Disclosing personal emails, even if from an ex-friend to the media in order to try to harm someone, is treasonous. It's also to be...
So women, because of their superior interpersonal skills and their superior ability to color within the lines and to play by the rules and to read what's going on, they seem to have an advantage navigating our lower trust society. And outside of strong male enclaves such as Orthodox Judaism, right, men are increasingly vulnerable.
Expected. In a lower trust society, we can no longer assume that even our friends won't betray us. This is doubly true if the friend has different politics from you. And it's triply true if you are a conservative and your friend is a liberal, because liberals are more likely to unfriend you over policies. Joshua Trevino noted that this article has a double purpose, writing,
Let us not forget that pieces like this are also instructional. They exist to give positive permission for ideologues on the left to elevate their politics over their personal relationships. They furthermore establish the expectation that all on the left will do the same. It is explicitly meant to subordinate both family and community to the cause.
We should respond to these sorts of things in two ways. We have to take stock of the new reality and simply put less trust in other people. It's a good rule of thumb that you should not put anything in an email, text, or group chat unless you think you could handle the heat if it were published in the Times. Again, you especially can't fully trust anyone with the opposite politics here. We should not reveal the private communications of others, even those of people with opposite politics or with whom we've had a falling out. Just because other people like Vance's friend will reveal private emails doesn't mean we should do the same. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard. What that standard should be for ourselves in this reality is not fully clear in every case. It certainly isn't the old WASP gentleman's code. As I've said before, people who tell you to abide by the social conventions of decades past, like the call for men to act like TV dad Ward Cleaver, are basically telling you to be a chump. That's one reason I say Tradcons are the enemy of the American man. We have to take account of the cold reality that we no longer live in a world of gentlemen, or one that lives by the old values. So we have to set standards for ourselves that are not reliant on reciprocation. I would say that not revealing private communications except in extraordinary circumstances is one such standard we can have. We should seek to be worthy of trust, even if society and many of the people in it are not. We should also try to encourage those around us to do the same. Ideally, we'd find ways to build our own moral communities, whether in a church, a friend group, etc., where it's possible to establish in-group standards that allow higher trust relationships to flourish. But doing that requires a community that delivers high value to its members, and which can effectively enforce its standards, such as by painfully expelling members who violate them. But in reality, few of us have these communities today. Negative World Olympics. You surely saw that the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics included a performance similar to Leonardo's painting of the Last Supper, except with drag queens. This caused an outpouring of offense by Christians and some others. This is another example of the negative world, in which official elite culture views Christianity negatively. No other religion would have received the same treatment in this sort of official ceremony. And there's certainly no one right way to respond to things like this. Those who complained about it, including the French Conference of Bishops, forced the Olympic Committee to issue a non-apology apology. The mere fact of the controversy detracts from the Olympics in ways that must have displeased French President Emmanuel Macron. So the outcry had an effect, and this was not a cost-free choice for the Olympics.
So the best way to navigate a low-trust society is to find your role within a high-trust community. So you can find that in 12-step, you can find that in religion, in Orthodox Judaism. There are high-trust communities out there, but they have standards. All right, they're not easy. They're going to make requirements of you. You'll have to sacrifice, but in the end, it's worth it.
But in my view, American Christians need to develop a thicker skin about things like this, which are only going to keep recurring. Now, someone said that ignoring insults like this is something that only a dhimmi or an aristocrat would do. The reality is Western Christians are dhimmis now in a certain sense. Posting on X about how offensive it is belies the reality, which is that they did it, they got away with it, and you can't stop them from doing it again. Angry people might say something needs to be done, but what can you do besides post on social media? I categorically reject political and social violence and encourage others to do the same. So doing what Ayatollah Khomeini did with Salman Rushdie is not an option. What legitimate and effective actions are there? What's more, the person who created that segment undoubtedly hoped to offend people with it. And by getting offended, you only provide him with the satisfaction of success. When triggering people is the point, the best revenge is not to be triggered. And it's worth pointing out, Christians are also aristocrats. The New Testament notes that we have been adopted as sons of God and have a secure inheritance in the kingdom of God. Do you not know that you will judge angels? So we can also take an aristocratic perspective on the matter. Again, different people have different perspectives on this issue. But in the negative world, we need to learn to get used to these sorts of insults and entrust ourselves to him who judges righteously. If Christianity is false, then it deserves to be mocked. See 1 Cor 15:19. But if Christianity is true, these insults aren't a problem for us, but a problem for them. Another thing we can do is look around and see who our friends are. While non-Christians who said nothing may not be enemies, there are all sorts of reasons why even someone who thought it was in poor taste might not publicly say anything. Those who did speak up are showing that they are potentially friends. Not every who defends your position needs to be treated as a friend. Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's current supreme leader, condemned the program. I don't want to partner with him, but there are surely many Muslims, Jews, and others of any or no religion in America who have demonstrated they are potential friends or allies by their support. In a world where there are infinite numbers of causes we could potentially support, I want to prioritize showing solidarity with people who are showing solidarity with me.
Yeah. So there are people who have traditional values in common, traditionalists of the Jewish, Christian, secular, Muslim variety, and we should make common cause with people to advance our agenda. And it may mean that we make common cause with gays to promote gentrification and safe streets in one area, and we make common cause with Muslims in another area, and we make common cause with people from all over the political spectrum. You win by enlarging the number of people who vote for you, by enlarging your coalition. So savvy coalition building is what helped Donald Trump win the presidency. So this is Aaron Renn, and he's talking about Tradcons, and they always want men to behave in a traditional manner towards women, but they don't expect women to behave in a traditional manner towards men. Instead, they will tend to embrace a feminist conception of sexual equality that frees women from their previous responsibilities and roles in a traditional system. So, traditionally, societies acknowledged sex differences, and that was accompanied by restrictions on male behavior and restrictions on female behavior. But the Tradcons don't tend to propose retaining those restrictions on female behavior. Instead, they want exactly the same opportunities for men and women, right? Essentially do anything that further empowers women, right? Tradcons argue like they are the real feminists. They affirm sexual differences, but they reinterpret them in a way that leads to feminine power and masculine devaluation. So there are a new set of rules for women who are freed from the constraints of the old rules, and then there are the old set of rules that men are supposed to keep living up to while women aren't living up to their traditional responsibilities. So you've got the Tradcons, who are the de facto enemies of men. Right? Men are treated as having less human dignity than women. They are assigned all the blame for family breakdown and out-of-wedlock births, and they're told to keep living as if it was the 1950s, while women are allowed to have a 21st century mindset, career, etc. So no wonder that young men today are looking elsewhere for people who seem to have a more accurate read of society and who seem to advocate for the men who follow them, rather than to tear them down, as many of these Tradcons do. All right, we shouldn't get depressed. On the other hand, there's never been a better time to be a man in
This
America.
voiceover is AI generated. Men in general are underperforming in society relative to women and have a large numbers of struggles in education, employment, with finding purpose in life, substance abuse, etc. Now, it's never been a better time to be a man who has his act together. So much of the discussion of men today talks about their problems. The problems they have, as with Richard Reeves' Book of Boys and Men, or the problems they cause, as with the endless complaints about toxic masculinity. But you shouldn't just look at the world through the lens of averages, but through the lens of yourself. What opportunities and challenges does this world provide you personally? The truth is, for a man who has it together, there's a ton of opportunity out there. In many ways, it's a golden age. Just consider the availability of knowledge. Think about all of the facts and insights that just I, myself, have provided in this newsletter. The information I've posted on attraction, on how relative attractiveness shifts as we age, and on the dynamics of online dating as knowledge people of my generation never had access to. We had no choice but to listen to official messages that sent out a lot of false information, including the equivalent of claiming that women are attracted to servant leaders, hint, not true, or think about the vast amount of information available about health and fitness. Yet there's a ton of conflicting info and plenty of misinformation and disinformation. You really do have to do the research. But at least there's actual availability of information, something you didn't have back when the USDA's food pyramid was telling you to load up on carbs. Then there's the products we can get, such as for actually eating healthy. When I grew up, we had delicious vegetables from our garden, but for the most part, everybody was forced to eat mass market, highly processed food because that was all that was available. The 1970s and 80s were a low point for consumption amenities. Today, farmers markets are everywhere. They are all sorts of options for buying fresh, healthy, ethically sourced food. Yes, it's often expensive, but it's available. When I was a kid, you couldn't get a lot of this stuff no matter how much money you had. Want to start a business? The barriers are lower than ever. Prior to the internet, I would never have been able to get my message out unless a miracle occurred, and some newspaper hired me as a columnist. Until 5 to 10 years ago, making a living from online writing was essentially impossible. It's still very difficult, and I strongly discourage people from entering the creator economy world, but at least it's possible with easy-to-use tools like Substack or Patreon. Tech startups used to have to raise millions of dollars to buy Spark servers and Oracle database licenses. There are still some fields that require large amounts of capital, but today, most of what you need is available on the cloud.
So it's worth asking what is true, what is helpful, useful, and adaptive to believe, what is ideal, what does my religion teach about this subject. All right, all sorts of different questions, and they're all important.
For next to nothing. Many businesses require next to no capital to start. It's similar with sweaty startups like home services. Every time I call somebody out to my house, they've got apps for scheduling, billing, payments, etc. It's all out there for you. And a lot of these guys are making a killing because demand is so high and the labor supply is so tight. And if you want to do that repair on your house or apartment yourself, just go to YouTube and get a video showing you exactly what you need and how it's done. The internet lets...
Whenever I get aches and pains, I go to YouTube, look for usually physical therapy videos on how to deal with some unexpected problem. But I still got way too much tightness and heaviness in my right hamstring. Haven't been able to fix that as yet.
You source any obscure part you might need for your dishwasher or whatever. I was someone who never learned anything about how to do even...
Well, I would rather make money and then pay for someone else to do home repairs and the like. Right? I'd rather develop my expertise, get paid, and then hire other people to do things that I'm not so good at.
The most basic home improvement task. But with the internet, I've been able to start taking on projects that I never would have dreamed possible. In terms of dating and marriage, we know women are frustrated at the shortage of men with college degrees and have other associated complaints. If you have your act together as a man, then you are a hot commodity, certainly for the kind of woman that you likely aspire to marry. Put it all together, and the opportunities have arguably never been greater than they are right now for men with above-average intelligence who have their act together. Look at what people like, say, Palmer Luckey have been able to accomplish at a young age. Even for those without their elite talent, the ceiling is a lot higher than you might think. Most of you men reading my newsletter, and according to my reader survey, 90% of you are men, are college educated. You probably have a lot going on in your life. You're probably Christian and are trying to live a moral life, avoid porn, etc. If you are reading Substack newsletters, that right there probably shows you are in the top 10% of men in terms of outlook. Even if you are out of shape, not where you want to be professionally, don't own a house, struggle to quit bad habits, just got divorced, etc., you've still got opportunities to improve. Within 1 year, you can make a major transformation for the better in your life. Within 5 years, you can be in a place you never thought possible. Some of you do have serious problems that hurt you. Maybe you have a disability. Maybe you have a criminal record. There are a lot of men in our society with real problems and who are in places where they can't just pull themselves up by their proverbial bootstraps. I know at least some of my readers are going through serious stuff. I've talked to some of you about it. For you guys, I don't want to beat you up. I'm not claiming you can turn it around quickly or that there's an obvious path forward. No shaming from me here. I'm just pulling for you guys. But for many of us, we can spend so much time focusing on the problems of men in society or complaining about the latest attack on toxic masculinity in the media that we forget how good our own opportunities are. Just because there's so much bad in the world doesn't mean you can't personally succeed. And the more that you succeed, the more you are able to do to help other people and be a positive influence in society. Success is a great thing if it doesn't turn you into a selfish jerk. The key is, let's focus on how we are going to win. And then when we do, let's pay it forward to others.
All right, that was Aaron Renn. There's never been a better time to be a man in America. The average man might be struggling, but for the man who has it together, the opportunities are incredible. Reminds me a bit of Australia. which is probably the best country in the world for the average bloke, but the most ambitious, the most talented Australians often end up moving to Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York, right? Because America is a much more individualist, success-oriented society. And so people who want to go to the very top, right, they tend to move to America. Now, J.D. Vance, Pete Buttigieg, right, important contrast between these two men, basically the same age, but Buttigieg is a prisoner of the playbook, and J.D. Vance did some brave things.
There are a lot of parallels between the paths of J.D. Vance and Pete Buttigieg. Though close to the same age, Vance, 40, and Buttigieg, 42, don't superficially seem to have much in common. Vance grew up in a dysfunctional white working-class world. Buttigieg was the child of Notre Dame college professors with big political ambitions from an early age. But put childhoods behind, and see that both of them were on the elite professional managerial fast track to the top via the standard series of resume-building activities. Buttigieg went to Harvard, interned for a Democratic politician, was Rhodes Scholar, did a stint at McKinsey, served in Afghanistan as an intelligence officer in the Naval Reserves, ran for Indiana State Treasurer, then did 2 terms as mayor of South Bend before running for president and landing a position as Secretary of Transportation in the Biden administration. Vance served in Iraq while enlisted in the Marines.
So I often looked at girls in school, and they would color within the lines, right? They would do what the teacher said. They would repeat back to the teacher the answers that she wanted to hear. That was not my nature. Right? My nature was to challenge, and that wasn't terribly popular, and so I got poor grades because of it often. The teachers did not appreciate me challenging them or trying to show them up, and it's not necessarily a great attitude to have when you're going through life and dealing with people more powerful than yourself, right? You don't want to be challenging your boss. You don't want to be challenging your academic mentor. It's going to be a painful, difficult life if you have this challenging personality that I do. And women just seem to color within the lines and to play the game better and tell teachers and tell powerful people what they want to hear. And there's a lot of the woman in Pete Buttigieg.
Went to a state school where he worked for a Republican politician, then to Yale Law, a stint in big law and venture capital, wrote a political memoir, started a nonprofit in Ohio, launched his own VC fund, then got elected to the Senate, and is now the Republican nominee for vice president. There are definitely differences, but a lot of similarities as well. Both obviously highly ambitious and motivated, both deployed to a combat theater in the military, both with elite education, both with relatively short stints in elite business, both winning and holding elected office, even both Midwest Rust Belt guys. Remember, Pete Buttigieg originally pitched himself as someone who understood the Rust Belt thanks to being mayor of post-industrial South Bend. But just as there was a convergence between the two of them sometime around their undergraduate education.
Okay, so is Aaron Renn right? Does having a college degree make you seem like a hot commodity to women? Well, yeah, for women who are university educated, it's highly unlikely that they will marry someone who's not university educated. And so much of social life in America is going to depend on having a college degree. So women who don't have a college degree, right, they're going to be much more open to you if you don't have a college degree. But for women who have advanced degrees or have even an undergraduate degree, they're highly unlikely to marry someone who does not have a college degree.
There's recently been a divergence. J.D. Vance holds a major platform elected office already, Senate, and is positioned to be a leading contender to be president for the next several cycles. He'll get multiple swings of the bat to make it into the Oval Office. By contrast, it's not obvious where Buttigieg goes from here. He's in a comparatively minor cabinet post. Dote is sometimes the one cabinet position a president gives to someone of the opposite party, and was just passed over for VP by Kamala Harris. He isn't qualified for a truly major cabinet office such as
All right, this Substack essay was published August 7 of last year.
Treasury or Defense. He moved to Michigan, and so would have to completely reboot his political career in a new state in order to achieve a platform-type position there. It's not obvious that there's a great path forward for him. What happened? Both of them were following the standard playbook to the letter. But somewhere along the line, J.D. Vance rebelled against the script. He was originally someone who talked about the way his own people needed to take responsibility for their lives and who denounced Donald Trump like all the other dutiful mainstream people. He was on track to become an establishment Republican with compelling backstory. What changed his mind? I can only speculate here. When I read Hillbilly Elegy, it seemed to me that he still had some stars in his eyes from the new world in which he found himself. He had not yet been in the elite world long enough to acquire the same critical distance from it that he had from his hillbilly roots. At some point, however, perhaps he got there. Maybe he realized the folks at the top weren't as elite as they made themselves out to be, that they too had problems they needed to face but were in denial about, that they didn't like his people or care about their problems much at all. But whatever the case, Vance decided to throw out the playbook and hoist the black flag, the MAGA flag. Rather than echoing the typical talking points and waiting for his turn to come, he seized the opportunity in front of him. He saw that the GOP establishment, unwilling to deal with the very real problems laid bare by the Trump phenomenon, had left the proverbial crown lying in the street, and he decided to pick it up. Make no mistake, that was a very difficult and costly decision for Vance. He went from being loved, or at least respected, to being loathed by a vast swath of the elite. The vast majority of us wouldn't dare to make even a much smaller choice to go against the standard track to rock the boat in even a minor way. But love him or hate him, Vance had the balls to lay it on the line. And it's given him a legitimate shot at the presidency as soon as 2028. Buttigieg, by contrast, has never once colored outside the lines as near as I can tell. He's still doing everything he's supposed to do, following all the rules in the playbook. But in a cutthroat era where potential elites are a dime a dozen, he may never get the chance he longs for. Maybe it's not over for Pete. Perhaps Tim Walz will explode on the launch pad and he could be the replacement. But barring something like that, Buttigieg will need to find a way to overturn the game board the way Vance did if he wants to revive his own fortunes. Otherwise, he'll be left with the scraps other people give him. There are probably some life lessons in there Vance could teach the rest of us. Vance's willingness to go against the mainstream consensus and seize opportunity helped him avoid Buttigieg's fate.
So are synagogues anti-men? Certainly not Orthodox synagogues. So in Orthodoxy, there is much more of a sense of ease with separate roles for men and women. And so when men can have their own safe spaces, right, you're not going to have synagogues that are anti-men, that are traditional. And I would think the same for Orthodox Christianity as well, and for large swaths of Roman Catholicism, right? In the Roman Catholic Church, there are special roles held just for men. Now, non-Orthodox synagogues will vary. So the more left-wing the synagogue, probably the more feminist the synagogue, right, the more anti-male the attitude. But overall, I don't believe that synagogues are as consistently anti-male as churches. All right, what are the bases of attraction? And so religious people often lift up, the servant man, the man who serves God. That's the type of person who is going to be sexy, the godly man, the holy man. But that's not really in line with reality. So what excites women in a man? And it's basically power and status, charisma and confidence, appearance, looks, style, and resources, especially money. So we have Monica Lewinsky, who was attracted to Bill Clinton and his power. We had Amal Alamuddin marrying George Clooney for his celebrity status and his looks. We had Melania Knauss marrying Donald Trump for his celebrity status and money. We had Viv Diviano at age 33 becoming the mistress of 81-year-old LA Clippers owner Donald Sterling for his money. And you have high school girls dreaming of being with the quarterback for the status and the athleticism. So women are attracted to powerful, high-status men, rich, good-looking guys. They are not chasing ugly, low-status guys with zero charisma who won't venture out of mum's basement. And so the wealthier the man, the more powerful man, right, in all likelihood, the higher the number of orgasms his woman experiences. Right? Women are looking for a man to protect her and to provide for her. Powerful men more likely to have powerful children, who themselves are more likely to have children. Only 40% of men in human history have ever had kids. So in the past, women may have had limited choices in who they married, but today there's an incentive to marry or have sex with the most powerful, rich man possible. There's a song by John Cougar Mellencamp. You got your eye on the cheerleader queen. You're walking her home from school. You know she's only 17. She's going to make you a fool. You know you can't touch this stuff without money or a brand new car. Let me give you some good advice, young man. You better learn to play guitar. So successful musicians, athletes, rich dudes, good-looking dudes, politicians, celebrities, corporate CEOs, and even high-profile pastors routinely have women who pursue them for sexual liaisons. And they often get caught in affairs because, generally speaking, men will risk everything for the chance of sex with an attractive young woman if they think they can get away with it. So women tend to pursue alpha males, high-status males. And so men tried to signal their status by driving a fancy car, wearing a Rolex. Some of it is cringeworthy, some of it's pathetic, some of it's just obvious bragging. But people do what works. Now, women are looking for some man to make a long-term investment. Usually, right? That's the rational path for women. But in today's environment, some women in some places feel like, oh, I'm free to hook up. I can casually date attractive men who are poor marriage material. So Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg said in her #1 New York Times bestseller, Lean In, when looking for a life partner, my advice to women is date. Translation, have sex with all of them, the bad boys, the cool boys, the commitment-phobic boys, the crazy boys, but do not marry them. The things that make the bad boys sexy do not make them good husbands. Right, so this is much of the explicit advice being given to young women today. Sleep with them all. It's terrible advice. For every man that a woman sleeps with, right, she's less likely to be good marriage and wife and mother material in the long run. Right, men are going to be more likely to make a long-term investment in a woman and the children they might make together if the women are godly, loving, committed, conscientious, generous, stable. So there are alpha characteristics and there are beta characteristics. And we can qualify the terms across multiple domains. And you can contrast reality with what many religious leaders stress. And the plain fact is that godliness and holiness is not in and of itself sexy. It's a good quality. It's a great thing to have, but it does not increase your sexual or romantic attraction to the opposite sex, right? That a man does spiritual things every day, such as Bible study and prayer, does not automatically make his wife want to have sex with him. That a guy goes to church every day or synagogue every day or Bible study on a regular basis isn't going to make women in the church want to go out with him. So often religious leaders tell men things that simply are not true. Right? Women only want godly men to the extent that they are attractive, high-status godly men. Right? Women would rather date the church's music leader than the church janitor.
The dissident left writer Freddie DeBoer had a great article about how contemporary therapy culture promotes selfishness. He says this despite liking the idea of therapy and, in fact, regularly going to therapy himself. He writes about a New York Times article that questions the wisdom of forgiveness, saying,
Do you want to know what ideology is? What we mean when we say ideology at its purest? It's not a collection of policy positions. It's not a political party you vote for. It's not even your conscious beliefs about right or wrong, your philosophy about how humans should act individually and collectively, and the relationship between those acts and the public and private good. No, ideology refers to those beliefs you do not examine because you do not see them as beliefs at all. Ideology isn't a matter of ingesting arguments about better or worse, right and wrong, and evaluating them to determine your own beliefs. Ideology is fundamentally the unexamined framework of the system through which you perform such an evaluation, the part you can't and don't see. It's the assumptions that you cannot understand as assumptions. And the ideology that NYT writer Karen demonstrates here, the set of assumptions she can't begin to examine critically because she does not notice them, says that the individual has no responsibility to anyone but themselves. There is no moral duty. There is only the immediate emotional needs of the individual, which eclipses all other concerns, which is sacrosanct. Read the piece. Find me any suggestion whatsoever that other people exist, and that we all have moral responsibilities to them, and that putting those responsibilities first is at the heart of emotional integrity and maturity. Those ideas simply aren't considered. What disturbs...
So one thing that makes men more attractive to women is confidence. And as a convert to Judaism, I noticed that Jews tend to have astronomical levels of confidence compared to the Protestants that I grew up with. Right? Many Protestants that I knew had this keen sense of sin, this keen sense of being flawed and broken. Also, I've been stunned by the high level of confidence that I've seen from African Americans. Asians don't display the same bravado, braggadocio, extreme confidence that I noticed with Jews and African Americans. But one thing that Protestants in particular, so Aaron Renn is a Protestant, right? One area where they can often improve is in the level of confidence. And when Protestants ran America, I suspect it would have been a lot easier for them to be filled with confidence. Now that they're trying to navigate a post-Christian America, an increasingly diverse America, it makes it more challenging for them to feel strong.
Me so much is the notion that the only criteria for deciding whether a behavior is worth doing is the individual's own emotional comfort.
He then says,
I have spent a good deal of time pointing to bizarre and unhealthy Instagram self-help meme culture. I admit that this is often a matter of picking low-hanging fruit, which is fun and easy, because a lot of this stuff really is deranged, and people find it entertaining when I make fun of it. But I actually do think it's important on a more meaningful level. I am convinced that the never-ending adult enculturation process we're all undergoing all the time is far more directed by the minor influences of ordinary life, ambient cultural attitudes, day-to-day exposure to co-workers and friends, and social media and television, than it is by abstract political, religious, and moral concepts. And the culture that we're creating genuinely frightens me. Between said capitalist selfishness, helicopter parenting, social media platforms that inherently reward narcissism, and this whole bonkers quasi-feminist woo-woo school of aspirational self-help, there's a never-ending supply of messages telling impressionable people that they should put themselves before others, inverting the most basic human moral principle. The question remains, who in the world could possibly look out at contemporary society and think that the message, put yourself before other people, isn't loud enough? Every women's site on the internet preaches this message.
So many rational guys think, oh, the way to attract a woman is by being extra nice, but nice people are not attractive, right? Niceness is boring. Nice people are a dime a dozen. Niceness only gets you so far. So far better attraction strategy is displaying excellence. So if you can participate in any kind of co-ed group activity where you may be excellent, right? When you show talent, that will trigger other people to want to mate with you. We are biologically hardwired to be attracted to anything that helps the gene pool, and talent is a signal for valuable genes. So instead of focusing on being nice, focus on being talented, attractive, smart, muscular, successful, high status, anything that suggests you have good genes. I like that.
Every hustle bro on Threads preaches this message. Every therapist between San Diego and Sacramento preaches this message. Every 8-word meme in overly elaborate cursive font on Pinterest preaches this message. Every asshole who's still holding on like death to GameStop stock preaches this message. There's the girl boss version, and the Joe Rogan bro version, and horoscope obsessive version, and the Wall Street grindset version, and the fitness guru on Trenbolone version. Justification for selfishness is not in short supply. It is the water in which we swim.
He argues that this has been heavily pushed by therapy culture, which delivers a stream of toxic ideas to people, including,
in the place of rules devised by moral philosophy and religion, therapy culture has erected others, such as you, your feelings, and your goals are always preeminent, and in any conflict supersede those of others. You are entitled to total and complete emotional safety at all times, and this entitlement supersedes the rights and desires of others. Simultaneously, you are a total...
I think therapy is frequently good, particularly if you don't have friends, family, strong connections, and you're trying to find your way back. The Talmud would agree with me. Sometimes it's better to buy a friend than not to have a friend at all. But what's good for an hour a week is not necessarily great for an overall culture. So frequently I think therapy, great. Therapeutic culture, as it infects our wider society, not so great.
Existentially, permanently fragile being. Since there is nothing that can be endured or recovered from that is not injustice, the concept of resilience is itself an expression of injustice. That which makes you feel better is that which is right to do. In any conflict between any two people, there is all...
That which makes you feel better is right to do. That which enables you to build your sense of self, your level of self-respect, right? That is right to do. So I have a cold shower every morning, right? That doesn't feel good, right? I don't look at pornography, and if I looked at porn, right, that might feel amazing. I don't slut it up with women I'm not interested in marrying. Right, that might feel amazing. I exercise when I don't feel like exercising. I may push myself to read books when I don't feel like reading books. So I don't pander to my audience. I don't just tell people what they want to hear to try to drive up ratings, because the most important thing for me is my own level of respect for myself. So that's more important than what things feel like in the moment.
Always one guilty abuser and one blameless victim. You argue, they gaslight, you have self-respect. They are narcissists, you are still growing, they are toxic, you have boundaries, they have limitations, you hold space, they stand in the way of your growth. Your own behavior is always a trauma response, and thus not your fault. The behavior of others is always freely chosen, and thus responsibility-bearing. Any of your behaviors is...
So we all tend to have explanations for why we show up late, or why we did bad work, or why we weren't reliable. So we have explanations and excuses for ourselves, but then when other people display the same bad behavior, right, we don't care about their reasons.
Is merely one small step on your journey, and you are still in the process of becoming yourself. Any behavior of others you don't like is constitutive of their very being, and cannot change. Wanting and not getting, for you, can never be an expression of the basic reality of existence, but rather is always evidence of crime, abuse, mistreatment, pathology, injustice. Everything you feel, do, and are is valid, always valid, until the end of time.
It's a great piece, and I'd encourage you to read the whole thing. De Boer is not, to the best of my knowledge, a religious person, but even he sees that this is a big problem. This idea that you should be more selfish permeates our culture today. My wife observed that in a recent Wall Street Journal article on why people were choosing not to have kids, the rationales in many cases were purely about selfish desires. The piece was called Why Americans Aren't Having Babies. Here's what some people said in it.
In New Orleans, 42-year-old Beth Davis epitomizes some millennials' new views. I wouldn't mess up the dynamic in my life right now for anything, especially someone that is 100% dependent on me, she says. But unlike their parents...
So I was just looking at X, and Kylie Thomas tweets, my entire train car just had to evacuate because a drugged-out man threatened to kill us. So there are a tiny number of people who are doing disproportionate harm to public transportation in particular in our bigger cities and to our public spaces. And these people need to be prioritized and put away.
And grandparents, the authors say, younger Americans view kids as one of many elements that can create a meaningful life. Weighed against other personal and professional ambitions, the investments of child-rearing don't always land in children's favor. Davis, who works in marketing, and her husband, Jacob Edenfield, 41, both say they always expected to hit a moment when they, too, wanted to become parents. When that still hadn't happened by the time they started dating in their mid-30s, they decided to start reorienting their lives. People told me when I was younger, oh, you'll grow into it. You'll develop those feelings. You'll want to start a family. And that just did not happen, says Edenfield, a creative director. They moved to New Orleans a year ago in search of the city's joie de vivre and other childless millennials, with a combined income of $280,000.
But there was a time around age 19 and 20, 21, where I was getting those feelings about settling down, getting married, having children. But then my circumstances changed, and what just seemed so natural at age 19, 20, 21 seemed to become more and more of a dream as I aged.
The couple is able to put about $4,500 a month toward what they hope will be a mid-50s retirement. Another $12,600 pays rent on a sprawling Creole townhouse. The remaining $8,000 or so, much of which they assume would have been eaten up by child-rearing, goes primarily toward enjoying their lives. The couple often dines at the city's upscale restaurants, including 2 recent 700-plus dinners, regularly works out at a high-end wellness center, and recently paid cash for a BMW. Edenfield meditates for an hour every morning and works on the novel he's writing at the local corner bar many nights. For companionship, the couple fosters a rotating cast of Bengal cats. Edenfield's sibling, Caitlin Hopkins, was inspired in part by her brother and sister-in-law's lifestyle to also remain childless. While she and her husband Will love kids, They say they would rather focus on being the best possible aunt and uncle. And then I get to still have my autonomy and routine, says Caitlin, a 35-year-old oyster farmer in Portland, Maine. The couple, now engaged, dated for 3 years in their 20s before spending the next decade in other relationships, thinking kids would happen someday. But when they got back together in 2019, they decided they were too old and too set in their existing lives to start a family of their own. While they both mourned that other possible path, they say they are content and have no regrets. Much of their disposable income now goes to travel, including recent trips to Greece, Spain, and Guatemala in the span of 3 months. For Meslar, who works in growth strategy for a CBD company, part of the justification for leaning into her kid-free reality was wanting to avoid making the same sacrifices she saw her parents make. She says she can't remember her mom or dad buying anything new for themselves while she was growing up, so they could afford for her and her 3 siblings to join sports leagues and attend out-of-state colleges.
Well, I do know a lot of happy childless couples, so I understand why many couples want to prioritize their happiness rather than having kids. So here's an essay by Renn, Christians are not being persecuted in America. Perhaps we live in a country where in many domains of elite society, there's essentially 100% public agreement on every major point. So he published this, I believe, in January 2024. I can't tell you how many conferences I've attended where there wasn't a single genuinely dissenting voice heard. Majority of the people I talk to in management of major companies and institutions will tell me that they think DEI has gone too far, but none of them will ever stick his neck out to say so in a public forum. Even among the independently wealthy, there are very few people willing to show courage. So we have indirect social pressures that our country puts on people. And conservatives are much more likely to get into trouble. So perhaps we should pay attention to the incentives that we're building in our society. And I think this is what the second Trump administration is doing a great job at. They are changing the incentives now so that all sorts of people who used to be promoting left-wing causes, they're now afraid to do so. They're afraid to donate. Right? They're afraid to challenge Donald Trump, and I think it's great. Top of the New York Times right now. At Columbia University, tension over Gaza protests hits breaking point under Trump. Fantastic. So days after immigration officers arrested a prominent pro-Hamas campus activist, administrators at Columbia University gathered students and faculty from the journalism school and issued a warning. Students who are not U.S. citizens should avoid publishing work on Gaza, Ukraine, and protests related to their former classmates' arrest, urged a First Amendment lawyer. Well, what they should avoid doing is actively participating and promoting in illegal protests that damage institutions that are anti-American, right? If you go to a dinner party, don't engage in behavior and words that displays contempt towards your host. So with 2 months to go before graduation, their academic accomplishments and their freedom could be at risk if they attract the ire of the Trump administration. It's not just the Trump administration. Americans don't particularly care for foreigners who come here and rape our country, abuse our country, demonstrate against our country, create trouble for our country, disrupt the institutions of our country, make it difficult for people to go to class, go to work, to go visit grandma, to pick up their children from childcare. Right? Americans are sick of that crap. We're sick of illegal protests, right, wrecking the public square, damaging our institutions, right, instigating, encouraging, incentivizing violence. And so if you want to do that to America, I don't care if you get deported. Right? That's absolutely fine with me. But I love it when the left and Democrats and the elite who are opposed to what I stand for are promoting lies. So this is what this First Amendment lawyer tells people. If you have a social media page, make sure it's not filled with commentary on the Middle East. No, make sure it's not filled with commentary saying how much you hate America and accusing America of being complicit in genocide. The school's journalism dean, right, Jelani Cobb, right, one of the giants of journalism, Right, so here is his wisdom. Johnny Cobb. Nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times. Right, these are dangerous times compared to what? Being in Ukraine, being in Gaza, being in central Detroit, right? Being in like some gang-ridden, infested, filthy part of America, right? These privileged people at Columbia University, right, who have more freedom than almost anybody in history, and they're getting told, we're in dangerous times. Nobody can protect you. For the past 2 years, student protests against the war in Gaza forced Columbia into a high-stakes balancing act between the competing demands of free speech and student safety. No. As soon as you commit illegal behavior, take over institutions, prevent the free exercise of people's freedom to go to class and to hold to whatever ideology they want, as soon as you interfere with that, setting up shanty towns and preventing people from walking freely on campus, then you are committing illegal behavior and you should be jailed for that. Right? People were upset with Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and these pro-Hamas demonstrations, not because of the speech, but because they incentivized violence and they disrupted institutions and they prevented people from the free exercise of their liberties. So I love it. The Trump administration revoked $400 million in federal grants and contracts with regard to Columbia University. And then they arrested Mahmoud Khalil, recent graduate of Columbia, removed him from university housing, stripping him of his green card, and deporting him. Why do we need someone who is actively organizing demonstrations to crap on America, disrupt America, to encourage illegal behavior in America, and to support Hamas and to be opposed to the United States? I'm fine with deporting this guy. It's not his speech. It's the illegal behavior that he was pushing. So good. Good. I'm glad.
I don't think I could really live up to the example they set. Or I think I could, but I don't think it would bring me the same joy, she says.
To be clear, some people talked about real issues causing them to decide against having kids, such as the cost, or the fact that they don't believe they themselves have a stable and secure enough life to have kids. One woman didn't want to have kids that would repeat the experiences she herself experienced growing up. But for others, it's simply that kids would cramp their style, get in the way of a life of consumption and fun. Nobody feels the slightest embarrassment about saying that their own lifestyle is their priority. As another example, for the past few years, I've also been noting that the media has been promoting the idea that it's great for women to divorce wonderful husbands for no reason beyond sheer selfishness. I have the example of Adele, who, in the glamorous fashion magazine Vogue, was revealed to have dumped her husband for no reason other than her own happiness.
I was just going through the motions, and I wasn't happy, she says. Neither of us did anything wrong. Neither of us hurt each other, or anything like that. It was just, I want my son to see me really love, and be loved. It's really important to me. She says she and Konecki were broken up for some time before they told people. Adele filed for divorce in 2019. I've been on my journey to find my true happiness ever since.
Her and her ex-husband had a 9-year-old son named Angelo, who was certainly not made happy by this divorce.
Some of the most difficult moments involved Angelo. On the whole, Adele says, the divorce has gone as smoothly as a divorce can. Konecki lives across the street, in a house Adele bought for him, and they share custody, and do regular family movie nights. Even during the turbulent moments, Adele had faith that she was doing the right thing. If I can reach the reason why I left, which was the pursuit of my own happiness, even though it made Angelo really unhappy. If I can find that happiness, and he sees me in that happiness, then maybe I'll be able to forgive myself for it. But she couldn't prevent the pain she was causing him in the meantime.
Vogue's UK edition's interview had this to say,
My son has had a lot of questions. Really good questions, really innocent questions that I just don't have an answer for. Like, why can't you still live together? She sighs. Gone are players and cads as song fodder, mostly. This is the deep sea of motherhood. I just felt like I wanted to explain to him, through this record, when he's in his 20s or 30s, who I am and why I voluntarily chose to dismantle his entire life in the pursuit of my own happiness. It made him really unhappy sometimes. And that's a real wound for me that I don't know if I'll ever be able to heal.
Any duty to a husband who she herself says did nothing wrong, or to her son that she brought into the world, are trumped by the quest for her own personal happiness. Laura Bazelon in the New York Times wrote that divorce can be a radical act of self-love. She wrote,
I've learned that divorce can also be an act of radical self-love that leaves the whole family better off. My divorce nearly 7 years ago freed me from a relationship that was crushing my spirit. It freed my children, then 5 and 3, from growing up in a profoundly unhealthy environment. There was no emotional or physical abuse in our home. There was no absence of love. I was in love with my husband when we got divorced. Part of me is in love with him still.
So this attitude that's being described depends upon the buffered conception of human identity, that just with your own brain you can decide what is right and wrong, what is a good idea for you and what's a bad idea, that you don't have to be influenced by everything that's going on around you. There aren't external standards that you need to live up to, right? You can just figure everything out on your own. You can figure out what makes you happy and simply do that which makes you happy, right? By contrast, from a traditional perspective, from a right-wing perspective, right, we understand that what is true and good and filled with meaning and what our responsibilities are, these are all things that exist outside of us, and that it is our duty, right, to reconcile ourselves to this reality outside of us, right? That's the traditional perspective on life, whether it's the religious perspective or any other traditional perspective. So all comes down to the differences and the implications of the buffered identity versus the porous identity. And it was Charles Taylor, a Canadian philosopher, who first articulated this in his book, A Secular Age. So he talks about contrasting ways that people experience their sense of self in relation to the world, and then this has many implications for how people navigate meaning, morality, and external influences. So buffered identity, right, that refers to a self that is insulated, autonomous, and distinct from the external world. I'm not distinct from you. What you say matters to me. Not as much as what I say to myself, right? It's more important to me that I have respect for myself than that you respect me. But what's going on with you affects me. I'm not insulated. I'm not autonomous. I'm not distinct from the external world. All right, I pick up cues in particular from my Orthodox Jewish community and from people who are important sources of income for me. So the individual who sees himself as having a clear boundary between themselves, their inner self, their mind, their will, their soul, and the outside environment, and nature, society, supernatural forces, that's the buffered, modern, liberal, secular conception of the self. And with this conception, there's a tremendous emphasis on self-control, rationality, and independence. So external forces such as spirits, emotions, social pressures are seen as separate and manageable. They're not an inherent part of the self. So the self is buffered by a sense of detachment or protection from unmediated influence. So this concept developed in modernity, in the Enlightenment, where disenchantment and secularization developed a view of the individual as a self-contained agent. Right? Think of Descartes' I think, therefore I am. So the self is defined by its internal reasoning capacity. So there are implications and strengths of this perspective. It promotes personal agency, critical thinking, and resilience against external manipulation. It aligns with individualism and the scientific worldview. Challenges can lead to isolation, disconnection from community and nature, and over-reliance on rationality, and diminishing of emotional and spiritual dimensions of life. So by contrast, the porous identity refers to a self that is open, permeable, and deeply interconnected with the external world, so that the boundaries between the individual and their surroundings, whether social, natural, or spiritual, are fluid and less defined. So at times, I have felt like an instrument of my employer, that there wasn't a Luke Ford. I was an instrument of my employer like software, or I felt like an integral part of a particular community. So characteristics of the porous self. The self is vulnerable to and shaped by external forces, such as emotions, spirits, traditions, communal values. So what goes on around me affects me. So experiences like enchantment, possession, or collective identity feel natural because the self isn't rigidly separated from the world. So many of my collective effervescent experiences have been within Orthodox Judaism and are just kind of meld into the group. So meaning and identity are then derived from relationships rather than from within. So this is the pre-modern, this is the enchanted worldview where people feel intertwined with their community, with the world, with unseen forces, with God, with communal narratives. So medieval peasants, for example, might see their fate as tied to divine will or village life. The strengths of this perspective fosters a sense of belonging, humility, and harmony with the environment or community, so it can enrich life with a sense of mystery and transcendence. Challenges leaves individuals more susceptible to external pressure, superstition, loss of personal autonomy, and it can clash with modern demands for self-determination. So in the buffered identity, people have a firm protective barrier and boundary up against everything outside of them. For the porous identity, the boundary is fluid and permeable. Source of meaning from the buffered identity is internal, self-defined, right? This is the modern, secular, liberal, left perspective on life. For the traditionalist, the source of meaning is external to one. It is outside of one. It's in God. It's in the cosmos. It's in the community, the nation, the people. Worldview from the buffered identity, it's secular, it's liberal, it's left, it's disenchanted, it's rational. From the porous identity, the traditional identity, it's enchanted and interconnected with others. High degree of autonomy with the buffered identity, low degree of autonomy with the porous identity because it is shared with community. Vulnerability, less vulnerability to external forces in theory with the buffered identity. And broader implications. So the move from porous to buffered identities reflects the rise of modernity. Now we may be seeing a return to porosity in post-modernity through spirituality, ecological awareness, digital interconnectedness. Psychological impact. A buffered self might struggle with loneliness. A porous self might grapple with feeling overwhelmed. Buffered identities tend to be individualist and most at ease in liberal democracies. Porous identities resonate with collective societies or tribes. Technology, internet and AI can be seen as making the buffered self more porous, as our identities are increasingly shaped by algorithms, online communities, shared narratives. All these things challenge the notion of an autonomous, insulated self. So the buffered identity prioritizes a fortified, self-reliant I. The porous identity embraces a relational, open we. Neither is inherently superior. The tension between them reflects ongoing human struggles to balance independence with connection in an ever-evolving world. That was from Grok.
Beat is two-way tonight. Welcome in, everybody. I was thinking today, is there a way to quantify the qualitative sense we all have that this administration is producing news galore unlike we have ever seen? I don't know how to measure that because, of course, we're in a different age. There's a lot of outlets. Like there's probably more TikTok action about Donald Trump than there was about Millard Fillmore. But every day, I hate to use the fire hose, drinking from the fire hose metaphor, but every day it is so difficult for us to decide what stories to bring you, what video clips to bring you. For example, the Vice President of the United States today wore socks with shamrocks to his meeting with the President and the Teosh, or however you pronounce that. Sorry to be disrespectful. I'm just bad at pronouncing. And the President pointed out his socks. Incredible moment. We're not bringing that to you. Go on Twitter. Find it yourself because there is so much news. And we have not two, three great guests tonight. Hogan Gidley, Alex Eisenstadt, both of whom have been here before, and Paul Orgel of C-SPAN, an extremely ingenious project that he did. I wouldn't say only C-SPAN could do it, but it's incredibly smart. He interviewed the freshmen and women members of the House, and we're going to have some clips from his interviews. Super compelling way to meet the newest members of the U.S. House O Representatives. So I'll have that for you in a little bit. But first, as they say in the television dodge, now the news. Probably the biggest political story of the day was something that happened semi-late this afternoon. That's another convention in the news business. If something happens after 3 o'clock and it causes a news program to have to kind of adjust its lineup to figure out how they're going to incorporate it, I would say late today. Sometimes it's in 3 in the afternoon. It's not really late. It was 3 hours ago. But anyway, in the news business today, late today, Senator Schumer took to the floor to announce that contrary to what my morning meeting colleagues Sean and Dan predicted, and they kind of dragooned me into agreeing with them, even though I didn't. Senate Democrats are not going to simply vote to allow the bill coming from the House on a continuing resolution to keep the government open to go through. And Republicans don't have by themselves, of course, the 60 votes needed to proceed. So we're now in a place where this morning the chances of a government shutdown were de minimis. Some said zero. We're now at a place where a chance of a shutdown is higher than zero. I don't know what it is. And it's still possible the Democrats will cave or they'll find some side deal. But tonight, as we meet, there's no obvious way we're avoiding a government shutdown. So here is, in the dramatic unfurling, as only a gentleman from Brooklyn can do. Number one, please. Here's Senator Schumer on the Senate floor, surprising the known universe by saying to John Thune, a la Hamilton, you don't got the votes.
Mr. President,
the Democratic leader.
Funding the government should be a bipartisan effort, but Republicans chose a partisan path, drafting their continuing resolution without any input from congressional Democrats. Because of that,
the chorus came in a classic instance of shutdown politics. A chorus of shouts came from the White House, from Trump allies, from Republicans in the Senate, saying the Democrats will own the shutdown, that they're the ones who are leading to this shutdown. Here's just one of 1,000 examples we could show you. Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, number 2, please.
Schumer wants to have another Schumer shutdown like he did in 2018, that'll be up to him. The Democrats will make a decision now if they're going to shut down the government or they're not. Republicans will do our part. They're going to deliver it, as Speaker Johnson said, in the House. We will deliver our 50-plus votes in the Senate, and then it'll be up to Schumer to deliver the rest of them.
Schumer shutdown has a certain alliterative illusion. Huh. Anyway, let's bring in our guests, assuming they're here. Hogan Gidley is here. Hogan Gidley worked. Hogan's not there. Just Hogan's. That's not Hogan. That's why Hogan's not there. That's not Hogan. My apologies. Let's bring that out. Hogan Gidley. There's Hogan Gidley. Hogan, welcome in. Hogan Gidley, as you know, the sensei. If I ever write another book, I'm going to Alex and say, Alex, you've gotten stories in every publication over like a month-long period. I will say, Alex, I wouldn't have started quite as early as you did. You didn't check with me. Started a little early. But pre-orders must just be through the roof. Doing all right. Yeah. Doing all right. So congratulations. And register to receive the notifications that include a little link to tell you how to get on the two-way platform. However, if you're on X or YouTube, first topic I brought up, Chuck Schumer. 2 questions. First one, Alex, who will be blamed if there's a shutdown? Or is that unclear as of now?
It appears Democrats will be, which makes me question whether they'll actually want to go through with it, given that if you see, further downfalls in the stock market following a government shutdown, that's not something Democrats want to get blamed for, given that they're currently blaming Donald Trump for the downturn in the stock market with the tariffs. So one wonders if Democrats are actually really going to want to go through with the shutdown if Schumer concludes that they will get blamed for a shutdown.
Yeah. John Fetterman said he would vote for it, but no other Democrat has publicly said that. Hogan, I suspect you'll agree with Alex that if there is a shutdown, the Democrats will take the blame, and therefore they may back off this posture.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of reporters I've spoken to, Mark, have told me this is the clearest example they've ever seen of Republicans doing a thing, and Democrats, if they go against that thing, would be blamed for a shutdown, which, of course, never happens. As Republicans, we always get blamed for them. But in this particular instance, the House passed a clean CR, the same basic bill and monetary values that Democrats voted on themselves 3 months ago. They refused to vote for it. Fine, it got through. It's over at the Senate now. It funds the government. If Chuck Schumer makes this move, it will be the Democrats who have decided to shut down the government.
All right,
and I think we have a good political.
Okay, so it's amusing how many powerful institutions and individuals are afraid right now to go up against this new Trump administration, considering in the first term it seemed like almost all of America's major institutions were in revolt against Donald Trump. But now, New York Times, more universities are choosing to stay neutral on the biggest issues. Instead of speaking out on the hot-button debates of the day, most schools are making it a policy to stay silent as political pressure mounts against higher education. So just a few years ago, university statements on the day's social and political issues abounded. Well, how would it work for you as an individual to be making statements at work? Right? That's a terrible idea. Right? The more vulnerable you are, the less likely you should be to gratuitously make enemies. So Russia attacks Ukraine. Harvard's president calls it senseless and deplorable, and flew Ukraine's flag in Harvard Yard. After George Floyd died, Cornell's president said she was sickened. University of Michigan president described the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel as horrific. But over the last year, each of these universities has adopted policies that limit official statements on current issues. All right, so 148 colleges have adopted institutional neutrality policies by the end of 2024. I think that's fantastic because they want to minimize the scorching political scrutiny they are under. All but 8 of these policies were adopted after the Hamas attack. Right, we don't need universities speaking out on all sorts of different issues. Right, let universities host teaching and host the free expression of different opinions, but we don't need Harvard and University of Michigan speaking out on the Middle East. All right, religion's great, but often religion gets disconnected from reality, and Renn is a Protestant Christian who's not a clergyman, but he is excellent at pointing out how Christian rhetoric departs from reality. So what women find attractive in a man is very different from what the church tells men women find attractive. So the church tells men servant leaders, right? These are what women find attractive, right? Women want godly men of high character who will provide for, affirm, serve, emotionally support, listen to, and validate the high worth of their women. But women don't find many of these qualities attractive at all. Christian women are like women generally. They're attracted to a completely different basket of traits. They're attracted to power, status, confidence, charisma, physical appearance, and resources such as money. So low-confidence fat guys who are broke and living in mum's basement are never going to be attractive to women, no matter how much time they spend praying and reading their Bibles. So I've had a lot of sponsees who had money problems, and they just wanted to spend the day praying and meditating and not meeting up to their responsibilities to their family. So it's good to ask, what does my religion say? What is true? What do I wish to be true? But you can't just settle for one single narrative, for example, that you get from your religion for how the world works, right? You have to really begin with the truth. You have to acknowledge the world as it is. And Christians tend to not have much problem doing that when talking about men. But the idea that they might judge women, right, that is very unpopular. So there was a pastor in Queens found out this the hard way in 2014. He wrote an article on his blog, 10 men Christian women should not marry. No problem there. Then he put up one called 10 women Christian men should not marry. This provoked a firestorm of controversy. So most pastors decide discretion is the better part of valor, and they focus their ministry on man up lectures and tend to avoid suggesting women might want to change anything about themselves to become more marketable or more effective or more godly. So Christian pastors are not telling the truth about things like attraction. This has bad personal consequences for the pastors who are not telling the truth, and it can have catastrophic consequences for people who listen to these pastors and take them seriously. So Stephen Pinker says political correctness is doing an enormous amount of harm in that part of the population that is highly literate, highly intelligent, and they just go along with all sorts of political correctness that is divorced from reality. Right? When people are exposed to the truth that they never heard in college or in the media or in respectable places, right, they go through a profound experience, right? They develop an attitude that is forever changed, right? They become infected with outrage. The basic bitch truths are unsayable, and there's no defense for them in taking these basic truths to what many people would consider repellent conclusions. So, good idea to stay in the truth. What is true? Fantasize about what you wish is true. Be aware of what your religion says is true, but don't be at war with reality.
I think it's the first option because of what Hogan said. The Republicans passed a bill. Now Democrats are trying to shoot it down or pushing back on it.
Hogan. Are you muted? Yeah, you're muted. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Come on, guys. I'm trying to run
a listen, he's right. I could see a world in which the media would say something like, Republicans did this without any Democrat input, so it's their fault.
Yeah, well, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, whatever. Shut up. Elections have consequences. The fact is it's through. If they don't vote for this, it is very obvious. The ball's in their court. And I imagine if they do some kind of cloture deal where they allow the 8 votes needed from the Democrats to
actually... I thought this morning, that's what I thought they'd do.
I thought they would too, and they still might. I mean, look, I think they're floating a test balloon to see if their allies in the media kind of come to their rescue. If they don't, and it doesn't look like the snap polling shows they have the stronger hand here, I think they cave.
I'll tell you one factor here that just should be noted and not underestimated is the base of the party, including the aforementioned squad, said absolutely not. You cannot be in good standing with the base if you.
So complaints from women have far more power in our current society. Complaints from protected groups, blacks, gays, had much more power, at least until the second Trump administration, compared to men, compared to straight people, compared to white people, compared to Christians. So we have all sorts of elite condemnation of the male gaze because men have pretty stereotypical views of female duty. This particular Subway ad was banned in England after women complained. Hollywood actresses are overwhelmingly conventionally attractive. So are the models who appear on covers of magazines. The Bible makes it clear that physical beauty is a big part of male attraction. So Rachel was more beautiful, for example, than Leia. And so to deny the importance of beauty and that men prefer women, right, in their early 20s, right, and that's just how it is. No matter how old the guy, he prefers a woman in her early 20s. And so women should be given the basic facts of life about different drivers of attraction for men and women. Men should also get the basic facts of life, right? Men tend to peak in attractiveness in their 30s if they've got a career. Women will peak in attractiveness around age 20. Right? Male attractiveness will come primarily from their jobs and their level of success. Pastor Tim Keller didn't become famous until his late 50s, but most men peak a lot earlier. So it's about age 35 when people start becoming aware of their mortality. Right? They become able to project their life forward through time, emotionally connect with their future selves in a way that they could not before. So until the mid to late 30s, most men tend to be just driven along the lines of their career.
Being, quote, unprepared, and compared the amount the Pentagon spent on gender dysphoria treatment to the amount the Pentagon spends on Viagra.
Okay, this is interesting. I want to hear more about this. All right, Fox News. Okay.
The president made the initial announcement last Friday in the same social media post in which he fired Air Force General C.Q. Brown, Jr., who served just 16 months as the country's top military official. President Trump is said to favor Cain because of his success against ISIS terrorists. Cain is said to be well-liked and nonpartisan. Trans rights groups are trying to halt the Pentagon's new policy of barring transgenders from military service. That was the subject of a hearing today. Correspondent David Spunt tells us what happened from the Justice Department.
A federal judge appearing inclined to deal another blow to President Trump's executive order banning transgender members of the military from actively serving. Signed at the end of January, the president's order served as the nexus to this memo from a Pentagon official 1 month later, proclaiming surgical and mental health constraints are incompatible with the high mental and physical standards necessary for military service. Today in court, Biden-appointed Judge Anna Reyes chastised the DOJ for being, quote, unprepared and compared the amount the Pentagon spent on gender dysphoria treatment to the amount the Pentagon spends on Viagra. She says $42 million on Viagra in 2024 and $52 million on gender dysphoria care over 10 years. Gender dysphoria is defined as stress one experiences from recognizing themselves as another gender than what was assigned at birth. Since 2015, about 1,000 people serving received gender transitioning surgery. There are about 2.2 million people serving in active duty and reserve roles. The plaintiff in this case, Army Reserve Second Lieutenant Nick Talbot.
I remember being wee little, witnessing the events of 9/11, 2001. That's kind of something that really sparked an inspiration in me to want to serve and help take care of my fellow Americans.
Talbot transitioned from female to male in 2012 and is proud to serve.
I was treated the same as everybody else. I showed up just like everyone else. I performed just like everyone else, and there was no disruption whatsoever caused simply by my presence.
John, this case could end up on the steps of the Supreme Court on the merits later this year. John?
And David, a big ruling today that blocks one of the president's executive orders. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right. That's from a federal judge here in Washington, D.C. This was an executive order signed last week targeting the law firm Perkins Coie.
Okay, it's just so hilarious to see big law cowering before Donald Trump. All right, back to Aaron Renn, Protestant thinker. He talks about the attraction curve. So when you're under 25, there's a strong female advantage. From 25 to 29, weak female advantage. Age 30, male-female parity. 31 to 35, weak male advantage. Over 35, strong male advantage. So many attractive women, when they get into their mid to late 30s, right, they find that there are very few, if any, men who want to date them. Right, but so both men and women decline in their physical attractiveness as they age, but men can buffer against this by increasing their status and their money. Women don't have those opportunities. So women in their 40s, right, they particularly have 40s and older, right, they particularly have a hard time finding men who want to marry them. So just as women are starting to gain some meta-awareness of the future story arc of their life, and they're starting to emotionally connect with what it will mean to live life alone, right, they're hit by this double whammy, right, that they are likely to grow old and die without any support from a husband and children, because they blew it when they were at their most marriageable. And I remember I would go to this Orthodox synagogue. There was an outreach Orthodox synagogue, Esha Torah, and they'd put on 20-something groups and 30-something groups. And there was just such a profound difference, particularly among the women. So the women in the 20-something groups were bubbly, outgoing, happy, and the women in the 30-something groups were overwhelmingly bitter, very quick to take offense. It sure seems like dating is the one thing that people tend to get worse at the more they do of it.
Support this CR,
and that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. So they're beholden there, and it's potentially there could be a shutdown now. I don't think there will. I think John Thune said some strikingly conciliatory things just a little while ago about, let's see what the Democrats need to get this done. So maybe there'll be some side deal. Maybe they'll get free Navy bean soup or something for 2 weeks in the Senate dining room. All right.
I just want to put this on the floor, but it doesn't it feel like this is more broadly symbolic of the issues that Democrats face, where you have the grassroots in the party who really want them to show some spine and fight against Trump, but then others in the party who say that maybe they could get blamed politically if they make certain moves.
Okay, back to Aaron Renn and some of the harsh facts of life. Women have less room to maneuver than men when it comes to getting married. And that's the truth. That's the reality. And people in religious life should tell the truth, including pastors. right? They should lay the facts of life out so that women can make better decisions how to live in a world that is aligned with certain realities. And you're doing a huge disservice to men and women by not leveling up with the truth. So if the Christian church doesn't adjust their teachings to match reality and find the courage to deliver some real talk on this reality to men and women, they're not going to be successful. You're not going to have any successful movement that is in active opposition to reality. So Renn is not a member of the Jordan Peterson fan club. Much of what he says is just basic. He plays the e-celeb game. Very nature of fame militates against his being around for the long haul. What gives Jordan Peterson his power is his willingness to stand and to say things that are simply not allowed by the elite cultural narrative, right? To violate political correctness. You cannot accurately describe reality without violating political correctness. So Jordan Peterson will draw considerable criticism for his statements about sex, the sexes, gender, if you like, how different psychological traits vary between the sexes. All right, this should be well-known stuff. Jordan Peterson's a psychologist. He has some expertise here. He's standing on solid ground, but it's ground that others fear to tread. And so Jordan has managed to make a celebrity of himself on this ground because others lack the courage to stand up and say deeply unpopular things that are true. So Jordan Peterson, right, very flawed man, but he has a huge following because he's willing to say some basic truths.
Yep, 100%. I mean, 100%. And again, this is another thing. I know you guys said the reason that it looks like Democrats would be blamed is because of the merits, but I do believe it's partly number two as well. I do believe that the press has moved off its reflexive bias on some occasions, and I'll tell you, this is where the loss of the absolute support of some of these institutions. I beat this drum all the time. They can't rely on Hollywood 100%. They can't rely on universities or woke CEOs or the Washington media 100%. They can rely on it more than 50%, Hogan, but they can't rely 100%. And so normally when Democrats go into a shutdown fight, when there's going to be a potential government shutdown, they'll be like, we got this, because the press decides who wins, and they're going to say, oh, the Republicans don't want people to be able to go to the parks, and people aren't going to get their checks. This time they can't rely on it, and the base doesn't get that. The base is like fight. We'll win this because NBC News and Politico will side with us. It's not as clear cut as it used to be, and it's a huge change. It's a huge loss of what for decades has been an asymmetrical advantage of the Democrats. All right, next issue, inflation. The numbers this morning, we talked about it in the morning meeting. Inflation, a little bit tempered, beat expectations. It's still an issue, and those numbers don't include every recent development, which could cut one way. I won't, as I say, I'm not going to go back and forth on all the tariff developments. There were more tariff developments today, but nothing conclusive. Now, let's look at the markets from our sponsor of our program, the Bahnsen Group. Here is what happened today in the various market indices. Sam, number 19, I believe. The Dow was down, but the S&P and the NASDAQ were up. So what we say, if I were at CNBC, is mixed results, mixed trading, whatever. The Bahnsen Group, sponsor of this program, if you haven't already subscribed, go to their website and subscribe to Dividend Cafe, their newsletter. Fantastic.
He won in large measure because of the...
So basic facts of life that are not politically correct. I notice a lot more Jews speaking out on them than Christians. Right, Lori Gottlieb, for example, secular Jewish therapist, wrote a book called Marry Him. What's the Christian equivalent of this book? So 2008, she wrote a controversial article in The Atlantic called Marry Him. She lays out the case for settling for Mr. Goodenough. And then she turned it into a book. Now, there are many older Christian singles who are writers, right? Why haven't any of them had the balls to write something as honest as what Lori Gottlieb turns out? And Renn says, Jewish women seem to have bigger balls than Christian men. Jewish men seem to have bigger balls than Christian men. Right? Jewish women have bigger balls than Christian women and Christian men. So Lori Gottlieb joins Erica Commissar and Amy Wax as Jewish writers who write in direct, bold, truth-telling essays of the type that Christian pastors do not write because they are too pussy.
The things he was talking about, whether it be tax cuts or tariffs. And I heard today an economist make the point that if you put tariffs, 25% tariffs on every good coming into this country, if you kept the tax cuts in place, that would offset each other. So you'd kind of be stagnant. But then after time, those tariffs go away, the economy continues to boom, or will boom. I do think Donald Trump has a record here. So as we're saying about what Donald Trump will do, let's not go too crazy. The fact is, he was president before. We had a record-setting economy.
So Renn has an essay here on the implications of online dating. So we now in a neoliberalization of relationships. So relationships are formed in the marketplace. It used to be, to the extent there was a market, it was a marriage market with dating serving as a funnel into it. Now there are multiple marketplaces. There's a sexual marketplace, a dating marketplace, a marriage marketplace. In the past, people could choose relationships, relationship-free hookups, casual dating, long-term relationships, or marriage. They could jump from one marketplace to another. Right? So online dating is the functional equivalent of globalization in trade. You're competing with everyone. And for most men, online dating is not going to work out. It's not going to be a good bet unless you're a top 10%, top 20% guy. Online dating is not going to work out for you. So men's attraction to women is heavily based on looks. Women's attraction to men is based on power, status, confidence, charisma, looks, style, and money. So if you're a good-looking guy with money, online dating will likely work out in your favor. You'll draw a lot of engagement. But if you're not in the top 10% of guys, you're going to be at great disadvantage in online dating. In most online dating platforms, women are besieged with responses. So think about how that would affect you, right, if dozens of people started emailing you. So it's hard to cut through all the noise and get noticed, and it's hard for you to get judged fairly by women. So the globalization effect, the looks-skewed environment, and women getting besieged online make online dating a bad environment for most men. So alternative strategies: go back to physical spaces and social communities in real life. Go to the more local markets. Go to women that you can meet up with in real life. Operate in situations where you put your best foot forward with women. Right? Meet them in situations where you have talent, where you excel. Women want status and confidence. Right? If you're a public speaker, if you're an excellent live streamer. Right? So men want to be in a local relationship marketplace, physical spaces, social circles, rather than the global marketplace of online dating. And then place yourself in those situations where your best attributes shine through, and you can be one of the top men there.
I think he's leaning back on that now, and he will absolutely want this news to change. But right now, I think he's trying to turn around an economy that was kind of in a bad spot.
Alex, if you look at markets, if you look at my inbox and yours of messages from lobbyists, business leaders, some members of Republicans in Congress, even some people from within the administration, it's not quite hair on fire panic, but people are like, this is not sustainable, this level of chaos on the tariffs. Do you get a sense there's any change afoot?
I don't get the sense yet there's change afoot, but one thing I have thought about is that if you look at Donald Trump in his second presidential run, he developed a lot of relationships with big donors. And in his first run, and many of whom were big financiers. In his first run, big donors were not part of the Trump coalition. During his presidency, Trump did not spend a lot of time mingling with big donors. But in his second presidential run, he did. He got a lot of big financiers behind him, a lot of big investors, a lot of billionaires. And one of the things I do wonder is that as he's, going through this issue throughout his second term, Are some of these big financiers, are they in his ear? And can they get him to change his mind on tariffs or on other economic policies that may skew a little bit more populist? And would that make him a bit more flexible when it comes to tariffs or some of these policies that he's implementing right now?
But how many of them, Alex, how many of these billionaires, I know many of them haven't been around, how many of them want tariffs?
Almost none.
Almost not, right. So I'm saying is he's not listening to them going, hey, these billionaires are telling.
Okay, this is the conclusion of Aaron Renn's essay, The Valorization of Selfishness.
I suspect that will always be the case. Even now, after everything, when he walks into the room, my stomach drops the same way it does before the roller coaster comes down. I divorced my husband not because I didn't love him. I divorced him because I loved myself more.
And of course, there's Honor Jones's similar piece in The Atlantic about how she demolished her life.
I didn't have a secret life, but I had a secret dream life, which might have been worse. I loved my husband. It's not that I didn't, but I felt that he was standing between me and the world, between me and myself. Everything I experienced, relationships, reality, my understanding of my own identity and desires, were filtered through him before I could access them. The worst part was that it wasn't remotely his fault. This is probably exactly what I asked him to do when we were 21 and first in love, even if I never said it out loud, to shelter me from the elements, to be caring and broad-shouldered. But now it was like I was always on my tiptoes, trying to see around him. I couldn't see, but I could imagine. I started imagining other lives, other homes. I kept wondering if I'd feel regret or remorse. It is hard to admit this. It makes me cold, as cold a woman as my ex-husband sometimes suspects I am. But I didn't. I felt raw, and I liked it. There was nothing between me and the world.
Honor Jones had 3 young children, by the way. So all of these articles are designed to send a message to women today. It's okay to divorce your husband for purely selfish reasons. It's no longer necessary to concoct some excuse or accuse him of having done something wrong. Selfishness is valorized in America today. Media and social media are sending off constant signals that you should care about yourself more and obligations to others less. Like everything else in our world, this is domain specific. When it comes to climate change, for example, I don't think there would be glowing stories about how we should consume more. Planet Earth be damned. But when it comes to things like forgiveness, honoring your marriage vows, or having children, people are positively encouraged to put themselves first. It's easy to complain about vain politicians or greedy billionaires, but the cold reality is that all too many of us live the same way. If we do it in less grand style than they, it's only for lack of opportunity. While we all do have legitimate interests of our own to pursue and assert, and we certainly ought to try to be happy, we should reject this idea of making our own happiness the summum bonum of life. It's contrary to God's design and law. It's antisocial. And paradoxically, it's also not the path to finding actual happiness. As the old quip goes, forgiving someone else is like setting a prisoner free, then realizing that the prisoner is yourself.
Okay, this is an amusing story from the New York Times. Ambitious Democrats have a new game plan. Yak it up about sports. Prominent leaders are flocking to sports radio shows and podcasts, an early sign of how the Democratic Party is trying to reach apolitical young men who have tilted toward President Trump. So, an early sign of the self-destructive nature of the alt-right was their open contempt for sports. But sports bring people together. Sports make people happier. An interest in sports will make you more effective. You'll feel more connected to other people. It's an easy conversation starter, particularly with men. And so there's something about the authenticity of Donald Trump that Democrats are trying to imitate. And so we've got Gavin Newsom, who has launched a thoughtful podcast, right? He had Steve Bannon on, he had Charlie Kirk on, he had Michael Savage on. So props to Gavin Newsom. And we have all these Democrats now going on podcasts to talk about sports. But unless there's something compelling about your personality and your worldview, right, you're not going to be able to easily replicate the success of those who are at ease with themselves, such as Donald Trump.
I mean, I want tariffs. He ran on this. He did it last time. In fact, Joe Biden kept his tariffs in place.
My question is, could they dissuade him or talk him off the ledge?
You're saying could they dissuade him?
Yeah. Is Lutnick a billionaire or a multimillionaire?
He's a billionaire.
All right, here's one billionaire who seems like the terrorist. Sam, this is number 7. Fox Business Network got an interview with Mr. Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary Extraordinaire. Here's what he had to say.
said, we're going to lower the temperature. You know, he thought he'd be sort of the big man and tackle Donald Trump. But you know you can't tackle Donald Trump. He is the most important, the smartest, the most capable leader in the world. And he's not going to let someone push him around. You know, the right answer is, if you take a step back, what does the president want? He wants to worry about major things for national security of America. Steel and aluminum tariffs, that's today, right? Autos coming April 2nd, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, things that America must have. So you can imagine these are the kind of tariffs we're going to make sure these things come back to America and are built in America. And then on April 2nd, he does his reciprocal tariffs, which basically say to all the countries in the world, come on, you treat us a certain way, we'll treat you the same way. Let's make it fair. You want them high, they'll be high like they are now. You want them low, they'll be low. But let's treat each other fairly. And that's where we're going. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward.
So, Alex, if you ask...
So if you're like me, you've lost a lot of friends arguing about politics, arguing about religion, arguing about the news. And it's incredibly self-destructive, given that almost all events are ephemeral, right? Almost nothing that happens terribly matters. And so to blow up friendships over having a strong opinion on vaccines or on capital gains rates or on Democrats versus Republicans, right? It's a stupid strategy. It's a maladaptive way to go through life. Now, if you enjoy the news like I do, right? I spend, $200 a month subscribing to various magazines, book reviews, the Financial Times. And a large part of the reason I subscribe to the Financial Times is because I appreciate the work of probably the world's most prestigious columnist right now, Janan Ganesh of Sri Lankan origins. And he's out with a story this week, the pandemic that didn't change the world. It's hard for a journalist to accept, but almost all events are ephemeral. Given that virtually all events are ephemeral, don't be blowing up friendships over them. Right, so remember, COVID was going to completely change the... Oh, my God, $100, Party Bots. Thank you, 40, for your contributions to high-quality streaming online. We appreciate all of your hard work. We are grateful for your magnanimous efforts in optimizing for truth. Keep it up, good sir. Wow. Party Bots, thank you so much. That's incredibly generous. Thank you for your participation and support of the channel. So, 5 years on, right, COVID, another event that was ephemeral. There have been historic turning points, the fall of the Soviet Union, the election of Donald Trump, but the 2008 global financial crash, right, the U.S. economy overcame that. The Iraq War, right, it was a fiasco. It was a boon for Iran, but wasn't exactly world-changing. After 9/11, it was common sense that religious terror would dominate Western strategic thinking over traditional interstate war as a threat to life and liberty. Right. So there are experts who would say that the major powers, such as Britain, should cut their nuclear deterrent to fund special forces, intelligence, and other agile assets to deal with Islamic terrorism. Right. Didn't exactly come through that way. So it takes an inhuman detachment. Maybe even this is where the Buffett identity may have an advantage, right? If you can detach, stand outside your times, and see almost everything that is happening as transient. If you fail to do this, you'll make irreversible mistakes. Right? The art that dates worst is usually the art that strives for contemporary relevance. So turning point is a sly phrase, all right? We're constantly living in liminal space. Liminal means boundary, all right? We're constantly living in a space between, one event, one era, and another era. But how many of these trends and events and social changes have really mattered? The rise of China, sure. The digitization of life, okay. Relativism and the loss of deference. So you can comfort yourself, this too shall pass. You can take the bleak angle that nothing matters, right? Not even the pandemic has radically changed the world? What about the loneliness epidemic or this or that fad? All right, so almost everything in the news is vapor. It is transient. It is ephemeral. And this poor writer, Janan Ganesh, he says, I gave a summer of my 20s to the parliamentary expenses scandal. So we are bad predictors of future behavior. Right? Most of the news that we think is incredibly important is not. That which is commanding, compelling, and exciting is rarely important. Right? But what does stick around is human nature. And from a traditional perspective, all right, human nature is not basically good. And that people will be selfish, avaricious, lustful, and flexible with regard to attaining their ends means that everyone at one time or another will disappoint you, because you will always expect them to have you as a higher priority than they really do, and you will be constantly disappointing other people.
Any random person who serves in the Trump administration, hey, how are you doing? They'll say, Lutnick's a pig. I'm exaggerating. My point is the comedy that's existed in this administration, Trump 2.0 as contrast to Trump 1.0, there's a lot of negative feelings about Lutnick for a variety of reasons. Do you have any reason to believe that his role will change?
No, but there's been skepticism about Lutnick for a while now, within some corners of the
Trumposphere.
Yeah, there's been, it was he came in at the very end of this campaign and sort of emerged as a spokesman, and some regard him as a little loud, a little boisterous. There was some sense among some that he was trying to push out or played rough with Scott Bessent, and that garnered him some ill will in some corners. And there are some people now who believe that he's not been a great spokesman for the tariffs.
Folks, if you got to listen to every syllable Alex says, because he is extremely well informed. That was beautiful and well said, and it even made Hogan smile. Hogan, folks should know, amongst the many ways Hogan Gidley makes money, because he's got streams galore of income, is he does media training. He does media training, right? That's one of the services you offer, right? Isn't that right? You've been paid to do media training for corporate executives. So how would you, if you were giving Mr. Lutnick advice after watching that clip, what would you say to tweak his performance?
I would say that cabinet secretaries that Donald Trump has picked both have knowledge of what they need to do because of their backgrounds and the experience they have to accomplish what Donald Trump wants them to do, but they're also good on television. I don't have any advice.
So as long as they have someone underneath them who's good at running things, then having cabinet secretaries who are good on TV, all right, maybe it's not the worst thing. All right, here's something you see from evangelical Christians all the time, right, about how I married up and she married down, right? The veneration of women and the contempt for men, the valorization of maximum choices for women and minimizing choices for men, that men are responsible for almost everything wrong with families. All right, this is not a healthy thing, and it is dominant among evangelical Christians in particular. About I married up, she married down. All right, evangelical Christian men are vastly more likely to self-deprecate like this when it comes to talking about their wives than other men do. Yes, right? Orthodox Jews would not usually speak this way. So this coach is operating out of the evangelical Christian playbook where women desire men who supply them with affirmation. In reality, women are primarily attracted to power, status, confidence, charisma, looks, style, and resources such as money. Women do not marry men, seek out men, feel attracted to men just because they're godly and conscientious. Women want to marry up. They're not going to marry down. If you tell her and state publicly that she married down, then you're telling her that she was an idiot for marrying you. Publicly affirm that you are not worthy to be married to her, she may very well start believing it. All right, building up your wife should not mean tearing yourself down in the process, and way too many Christians do this. All right, this is going to be counterproductive for the happiness and success of both groups.
Nice to give Howard Lutnick.
Howard Lutnick was perfect. Let me ask you this. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, did he suck up to the president enough?
Now, look, here's my deal, as you would appreciate it, or both of you appreciate it, Alex and Mark, as journalists.
Yeah.
Attribution is your salvation. It's easy to say, as the president has said, and double down and use the president's words constantly. That's what I think would be a good practice for all the cabinet secretaries to do. And I'm not saying Howard Lutnick didn't do that there. I'm just saying that's my little short piece of advice for all the cabinet secretaries I know and that I've talked to. When they get in the jam, it's what the president has said. You're there to execute on what the president wants. Stick there and you'll be fine.
All right. What is the most famous refueling stop for American diplomats and officials as they travel overseas? Where's the place they most often refuel? Shannon, Ireland.
Oh, I've been there.
Sometimes in Alaska. Alex, have you never done the Shannon refuel?
No.
You need to get that on your bucket list. Hogan, come back soon. So today, the vice president. No, I'm sorry.
I got this. I got this at the Shannon stop. You can only get it there. Jameson's signature. You can only buy this at that Shannon stop.
That's amazing. Did you get me one? I want one of those.
This was years ago.
You can't buy it online?
I was told you couldn't, but it could have been one of those scams they were just trying to get you to do it.
All right. In any case, today, Secretary of State Rubio flying from, where was he flying from? From Saudi to Canada, where he's meeting with G7 foreign ministers later this week. Stopped at Shannon and talked to the press. That's something that happens. You land in Shannon for the refuel and you talk to the media. He said that he hoped that there'd be a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and that if Russia was on board, it could happen within days. That'd be major news if that happened. Echoing that belief that the ball is very much in Russia's court, but that they might act favorably, is the Vice President of the United States. This would be number 9, please.
Okay, what are the different ways that liberals and conservatives take over institutions? Another excellent, thoughtful essay here by Renn. So here's what conservative institutional capture looks like. So what works for the left won't necessarily work for the right, right? People on the right have to use different tactics, right? You can read Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, but you're an idiot if you think that those rules will work the same way for you. All right, the left is great at burrowing into organizations, working their way into positions of authority of leverage, then using that to transform those institutions from the inside out. People on the left do not typically care about the actual mission of the organization. They will often think the organization has a bad mission. It's their job to change that. So they can devote all of their efforts to institutional capture and transformation. Conservatives are bad at stopping this because they are more interested in the mission than in organizational politics. So the left-wing approach is often called the long march through the institutions. And many people advocate that conservatives do the same thing, but it's not going to work. The left controls institutions, and they are not dumb enough to allow conservatives in the door or to allow them to do any subverting. Few conservatives have the interest, the conscience, or the stomach for successfully capturing institutions from the inside. But there is a right-wing version of institutional capture. So rather than a bottom-up project of capture and infiltration, the right-wing model is a top-down restructuring of an institution modeled on a private equity approach. This is what the Trump administration is doing. So someone on the right captures, restructures a failing institution. They will take it over from the top, same way a private equity firm would buy out an underperforming company and then reform the company to function on a new mission. So we had Ron DeSantis take over New College of Florida. We had Elon Musk take over Twitter and rename it X. All right. He loved Twitter. He didn't like the way Twitter was being run. He fired 80% of the employees and reinvigorated it. So he bought the company that enabled him to implement his vision top down. Then we have the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that was restructured, and a group of conservatives replaced the seminary's board, replaced the president, and sacked 95% of the faculty, lost most of the students. They rebuilt the seminary, and is now a successful, solid conservative seminary. So if you're on the political right, you want to change institutions, your best bet is to think like a private equity firm. Take it over, restructure from the top, be indifferent to the complaining down below. Not easy to do, but what works for the left is not going to work for the right.
Well, we've got some conversations that are happening on the phone and in person with some of our representatives over the next couple of days. As the president said, we think that we're in a very good place where the Ukrainians have agreed to a ceasefire, and we're now going to see whether we can get the Russians to agree to a ceasefire too. And we'll certainly have news on that when we find out that news.
As the president said.
Exactly. As the president said, but again, striking, and Hogan, who's a veteran of 16 administrations, will know this. You don't often see the vice president chatting it up in the Oval with the president there, right? Normally the president's the one who's answering the questions, but there he is answering. Alex, they seem very optimistic that they're going to get to the next phase here. What do you know about where we stand on Russia-Ukraine?
Well, they seem optimistic, but just putting this on the floor, the two questions I have right now is, one, why hasn't Putin agreed to anything yet? And two, if Putin doesn't agree to anything, then what happens? Because at this point, you have a White House that is much more aligned with Putin than the Biden White House was. So what happens if Putin says no deal? And to me, that's the big question here going forward.
Hogan.
I mean, I would take some objection to the fact that this administration is more aligned with Russia than the previous. However,
so what religion needs is more sense of reality. That just because you understand traditional texts or traditional rituals in a particular way doesn't mean that you are admitting and open to what's really happening in the world around you. And here's a classic topic: beauty. It's not just in the eye of the beholder, right? There is a biological objective component to beauty, and there is a subjective component to beauty, right? There's also a cultural component to beauty. There is an individual component to beauty, right? There's some variation in what we find attractive, and beauty is expressed socially, right? There's a lot of policing of beauty standards. Women will tend to judge other men harshly over their looks. Right? You see this particularly in the manosphere, that, oh, this woman is not worthy of you. Right? That's a toxic part of the manosphere, right? Beauty is much more malleable than we think. What we find beautiful is broader often than what is publicly expressed. Don't let manosphere influences psych you out of getting married or dating women that you genuinely find attractive. There are all sorts of women who I did not initially find attractive. It only happened after I got to know them, right? Once you get to know a woman, it can completely transform how you feel about her.
That the world is not going to want to buy. And that's a set of circumstances that is imminent. You are going to see shocking developments in terms of how that's going to be dealt with. Things that may not have happened in our lifetimes.
Trump understands this, but Democrats, for political reasons, pretend not to.
President Biden had left him an economy with steady growth, with all-time high stock markets, and with inflation coming down.
Donald Trump was given an economy that was on the way up. It's completely inverted now.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That must be why Kamala won. Oh, wait. Now, the truth is, Trump is delivering for the American people. Companies are moving in or expanding, not shrinking or moving out. A Japanese beer company in Wisconsin boosting its production. 2 different South Korean steel makers are looking to bring production here. And Volvo, they're considering expanding production at their South Carolina plant. But still, Democrats want you to believe they suddenly have the real solution for the middle class?
Right, Aaron Renn, another great Substack article here. The resistance will be organized. Anti-Trump evangelicals are well organized and well funded. So Tim Alberta, who's anti-Trump but reasonably fair, writes for The Atlantic. He's got a new book out, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism. So it's a behind-the-scenes look at the evangelical resistance movement, that is, those who vociferously oppose the evangelicals who support Donald Trump. So anti-Trump evangelicals started getting organized as far back as 2015. Right? Russell Moore met with the outliers, such as Tim Keller, Pete Weiner, and Francis Collins, and David Brooks. They talked about Trump, and they thought, what can we do to stop the rise of Trump? Right? They gave themselves the name the Outliers. Then they met in the fall of 2015, when few people believed that Trump would win the GOP nomination, much less the presidency. Then note the presence of elite journalist David Brooks. Right? So David Brooks is not just a sympathetic or disinterested observer on Donald Trump. He is actively anti-Trump. So is the author here, Tim Alberta. High-level, powerful evangelicals believe that overlapping elite networks are what drive cultural change. So these high-profile leaders are extremely well networked with each other and with people in the elite media. Now, so far, their efforts have produced no change in American culture, but these people do have tremendous power over evangelical Christianity and its institutions. Right? So their relations with the elite media give them the equivalent of a nuclear arsenal that they can use to bomb their evangelical opponents who have no such vehicle for retaliation. So few people in mainstream professional society or in major institutions are capable of standing up to the elite media, which is why Aaron Renn calls this the nuclear weapon. So these relationships saved Russell Moore's job with the Southern Baptist Convention back in 2017. So if the Southern Baptists had fired Russell Moore, the Washington Post and other major publications were going to call them racist for doing so. So Russell Moore kept his job. He probably was the original source for a story that got the Washington Post on his side. So there are all sorts of powerful evangelicals meeting with regard to what to do about Donald Trump, right? All sorts of things going on behind the scenes. So they're building networks, focusing on elite networks, empowering elite Christians, high-level operators, people with deep connections to the evangelical world and the secular world, right? Undertaking myriad efforts to de-Trumpize their own denominations and churches. So they have overlapping efforts. It's a secret society running the demographic and ideological spectrum so long as it's anti-Trump. So Russell Moore is probably the most powerful person here. The demand for Russell Moore's private network building seminars has exploded beyond any reasonable supply. So he's created a curriculum on politics targeting churches called After Party. Right? And the point is to be anti-Trump. And they couldn't get evangelical Christians to fund them, so they got non-Christians to fund them. Right? They got secular, left-wing, non-Christian funders to pay for their operation. So we have a well-funded, elite bunch of people, heavily organized, highly networked, well-funded, well-organized, and having absolutely zero impact so far on broader American culture and have had no success stopping Donald Trump. It's too glorious.
Donald Trump has been very clear about this. He has said on multiple occasions he wants the bloodshed to stop. And that starts with bringing Ukraine to the table, figuring out what kind of deal they'd be amenable to, and then bringing Russia along with them. So if this is actually happening, I mean, only Donald Trump could have put it together. He did so in quick pace per usual. But I, for one, I think am sitting where most Americans are, which is At this point, we want this whole thing to end. However you get there and see what happens.
All right, two more stories that former or current, still not clear to me, Columbia University grad student who's currently being held in Louisiana. Judge heard arguments today and said he's going to stay in Louisiana and he should be able to talk to his lawyer. So no resolution of that case. And something I want you both to react to. Again, we talked about it this morning, but there's been more reaction today. Jeanne Shaheen, Democratic senator from New Hampshire, says she's not going to run for re-election. We speculated this morning on the morning meeting that maybe Hogan's friend Caroline Leavitt would run for Senate. Hogan, not old enough. She will not be 30 by the time she'd be sworn in, so she cannot run for Senate. I wanted to give that little correction. Either of you want to talk about Jeanne Shaheen and that seat? Sununu, Pappas, anything? You on the two-way platform. I know I'm right. Paul Orgel. Am I pronouncing your name right? Orgel?
Orgel.
Orgel. No, not close enough. Paul Orgel. They told me how to say it right. I'm just horrible at pronouncing. Paul Orgel. Paul, tell folks what you do at C-SPAN.
So I am a senior producer at C-SPAN. Been there over 30 years. I've done a bunch of different jobs. Currently a senior producer, producing special content, special programming. A lot of it's in the area of history, but a lot of it's in the area of public affairs as well. Just creating that content and pushing it out for everyone to see. So we've got an interesting project. We're in the middle.
Okay, Kip asked a question. Did my father prefer Trinity Broadcasting Network or Cinemax? My father would never watch any content that had nudity or sexual situations. He didn't watch a lot of Christian content, but he did often start the day with the 700 Club. But in the evening, he would listen to Dan Rather. Right, another essay here from Aaron Renn. Affinity, group, migration, the quest for community. Right, loneliness is a big problem for many people. Many people ache for real friendship, real community. So people are engaged in affinity, group, migration. They are looking to live near people who are like them, who are like them politically and culturally and religiously and racially. It's the big sort. And we had two articles in the New York Times about a year ago. So Ruth Graham had a front page article, Why a New Conservative Brain Trust is Resettling Across America. So many of Claremont Institute's key figures have been leaving California for more ideological friendly neighborhoods, such as in Texas. Then there is a separate New York Times article in the style section about a men's encounter group called All Kings. So it's a brotherhood dedicated to supporting and empowering men impacted by the justice system and young men at risk. So it focuses on ex-offenders, but not limited to them. So there is a hunger for real, substantial men's community. Now, not everyone likes the idea. Right? Feminist critics don't like this. They don't like narratives of masculine empowerment. They don't want men feeling good. I notice women tend to feel scared when male testosterone's running high, when men are feeling great, right? Often their wife will want to prick the balloon. It frightens women. It frightens wives when men are thriving, when they're feeling their testosterone, when they're celebrating, when they're having big success. You notice that the more successful Barack Obama was, right, the more unhappy Michelle Obama looked. So are they headed for divorce? They seem to have less and less in common these days. So our society looks down on men's groups, right? Any non-ideologically approved men's groups, right, they think is illegitimate. So if you have all male groups that aren't devoted to some left-wing feminist struggle session, is going to be attacked. So men's groups are now essentially underground and illegible. A great point here from Aaron Renn. Becoming illegible. In the negative world, people should look at ways to become less visible to governments and other entities. So Aaron Renn's point is that since the Obergefell ruling, America has been a negative country for Christians. It's been anti-Christian. So, legibility. There's a book, Seeing Like a State, How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed. So, states seek to force legibility on their subjects by homogenizing them and creating standards that simplify pre-existing natural diverse social arrangements. So the introduction of last names, censuses, uniform languages, this is all to facilitate state control and economies of scale, to eradicate local differences and silence local expertise. And one example of legibility is the land register. Now, everything about our society is designed around extreme legibility. And it's not just the government, it's also big tech. Right? Big tech sees like a state. So for the first time in 400-year history of Christianity in this country, official American society now views Christianity more negatively than positively. So if you are not legible to the government and to big tech, it is harder for these entities to impose their mandates on you. So we have a growth of informal men's retreats. Right? All men's groups, all men's organizations are heavily stigmatized and criticized, frowned upon, ostracized in our society, and frequently outright illegal. Right? Church men's groups and a few others are basically what's left, and all of them have a big target on their back. Right? The New York Times, for days on end, was on a jihad against the Augusta National Golf Club to bully them into admitting women. So if there is any all-male organization, if it manages to exist, right, becoming a member of it will be hazardous to your health. Right? If the media decides to make a big issue of it, which they love to do. So what we see instead is the development organically of groups of men creating informal retreats. Right? They're not creating formal organizations, institutions, or networks. They're just friends. They're birds of a feather. They get together for a guy's weekend that's social, but will also have professional purposes. These groups are not incorporated. They don't have official membership lists. They may not have a name, so they are far less legible to society. Right? Men get together for a weekend with their buddies. That's not legible. These groups are informal. They're not hierarchical. They're not incorporated. So this helps reduce legibility to those institutions and people and entities that do not like you. Now, setting up a business without the required permits and not paying your taxes, that is illegal. Don't do that. But there are many ways to potentially apply the informality principle to reduce legibility in America. So have informal retreats, informal house churches or synagogues. Right. Remove an emphasis on credentials. Replace formal mechanisms like degrees in decision-making with informal networks of interpersonal trust. Move to family and clan-based networks. Particularly in an increasingly low-trust America, these can be incredibly powerful. Right? You'll be much less likely to run afoul of U.S. anti-discrimination laws. Now, non-white ethnic groups can engage in this type of discrimination to ensure real estate stays owned within their particular ethnic group, but white people are not allowed to do this. Right? There are all sorts of affinity group scams, particularly in the Mormon community. You don't want to be in a legible ethnic network, but be in an informal network. So the government is deeply hostile to this. We'll try vigorously to step it out. Right? There are online networks of influencers. These people typically have no formal relationship with each other. They may not even know each other in real life, but they are part of a semi-unified discourse. Right? Establishment entities do not like these informal networks. So you find all sorts of activist academics and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, publishing research trying to map these informal networks through analysis of social media. Right? And they push forward these guilt by association attacks. But these attacks carry less weight in the public mind than formal relationships such as membership in a shared organization. So anything that is oriented around informal versus formal is less legible. So part of unplugging from the regime is developing the ability to make ourselves illegible to the regime. If the regime cannot easily read us, it cannot govern us, and it cannot assert authority over us. So the technocratic administrative state wants to register us legible while keeping itself illegible. So part of establishing our own space is the process of making ourselves invisible to the state as much as possible.
Of right now, which is why we're on the show today.
Right. Well, we're so glad to have your welcome in. I can't wait to see what Alex and Hogan say. I bet they've never heard of some of these folks. So you're profiling through interviews the freshman class and freshman woman class. How many members of that class are there?
There are 62 new members. I'm calling them true freshmen because there were 3 other members who actually served years ago. In one case, 30 plus years ago. Right. But we've interviewed over 60 of them. And, over the years, we've made it a point to talk to members as they're leaving Congress. We've also, in recent years, have started talking to members as they're coming to Congress. And it's a really good chance at the beginning of a term to step away from the politics and policy for a minute and allow them to just introduce themselves. Yep. So it's been really neat. It's been really challenging and fun. People from all over the country, obviously, not just the states, but a couple of the territories. And this is how you grew up. Where did you go to school? Who were your early influences? Were you always a Republican or Democrat, and why? And how do you know? Early professional experience.
Right, Aaron Renn is a terrific interviewer. So this is a video, Why Men Hate Going to Church. Why does the American church skew female? Right, unless you have special...
Hello, welcome back to the show. And I'm very excited today to have a very special guest, David Murrow, who is the author of the landmark book, Why Men Hate Going to Church. Thanks for holding that up. I asked him to bring it because mine's Kindle. A lot of the books I are on a Kindle. It's not as exciting to hold up the Kindle, particularly since my Kindle is splashed up. So thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, Aaron. Thank you.
And there is a link to buy that book on Amazon in the show notes. And if you actually buy through that link, I get like 5 cents or something. So
I get 2 cents.
There you go. There you go. That's a way to do it. And if you haven't hit subscribe on YouTube yet, hit the subscribe button.
Apologies say about what's going on as far as gender roles in the church. And then the revised issue that you're referring to came out in 2011.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was a great book. And again, it's still worth going back to today and looking. And even though it came out in 2005, some of the stuff we'll talk about later on is I think you were actually prescient on some issues that people may have said, may have pushed back on at the time, but now they're there. Did you pick the title yourself?
Went back and forth. My original version was Why Men Don't Go to Church. Mm-hmm. And my editor said, well, they go, but they don't like it. And so I wanted to use the word hate. He didn't like that word on a Christian book, but, it really does describe the emotion that men...
Right. That's another example of how Christians frequently get disconnected from reality by thinking just the use of a word like hate, that's a bad thing. Right. You can't describe reality without being open about widespread hatred.
Particularly younger men feel when they think about going to church. What's interesting is young men don't hate Jesus. They don't hate God. They don't even necessarily...
They don't like going to a place that diminishes their masculinity, that places women above them, right? Churches tend to be anti-male.
They hate religious practices. What they hate is the mechanics of going to church, the ideas of organized religion, sitting in a row, sacramental sort of things. It's just meaningless to men in many cases, unless they themselves grew up religious. So that's one of the gaps we're having to deal with is this perception among men that it's unmanly to go to church.
Yeah. So I thought the title was great, to be quite honest, because it's like, I say it's simple, direct, masculine. It's everything you're talking about kind of encapsulated in the title. None of this, can't we all just get along? Nope, men hate going to church and what's going on with that. So how did you get interested in the topic again?
Well, as I said, my background is in anthropology, and I was sitting in church one Sunday, and my mind was drifting during a sermon. I know that never happens to you, but I began to fall back on my ethnographic training from college, and I looked at my church and asked, is this a matriarchy? or a patriarchy. And I looked at all the symbols in the room, and there was quilts and flowers and banners and lace and ribbons. And I looked at the pastor, and he was wearing a robe and a multicolored stole, and he was speaking of love and beauty and relationships and nurturing and harmony. And then I looked at the volunteer opportunities in the bulletin, and it was for childcare and cooking and caring for the sick. And I looked around the room, and I counted noses, and over 60% of those noses had lipstick underneath. And I began to realize in that moment that our church was designed to enthrall and engage a woman with an empty nest, a 55-plus woman who wanted to stay busy, who wanted to have children in her arms, and everything about that institution was designed to thrill and enthrall her. And there was almost nothing to animate the heart of a young man.
Yeah, the quote that I took out of the book here, it says, "No matter what the name on the outside, there are always more women on the inside. The men who do show up for services often seem passive, bored, or uneasy." And I think I definitely sense some of that. It varies by church, but what are kind of the stats? What is the ratios today? In terms of who attends.
Yeah. Well, when I did my original research, I found that the typical congregation in North America drew an adult crowd that was 61% female and 39% male. And it's important to understand that no other world religion has a gender gap even up close to this. Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, and of course, Islam draw a much closer to gender balanced congregation. In fact, Mormons and Muslims, the two fastest growing religions in America right now, are both male heavy. So it's very important if you want your church to grow to draw in men, because once a church begins to, I always say this, once a church is 70% female, you can write its obituary. You cannot, the church is a two-winged bird. You need both masculine and feminine spirit. And if you don't have both, the church will either topple into legalism if it's too masculine, or it'll topple into liberalism if it's too feminine.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. What I've noticed is the real imbalance is in the single contribution. In fact, I often, this is one of the things that I look in when I go to a church, and I like to visit new churches and just check them out. How many single, like under 40 single men are there in the church? And some of these places, that's hardly any.
That's the real deficit. I don't have any hard numbers on that, but I can tell you an experience I had a few years ago. I spoke at a very large church in Oklahoma and asked all the young single men aged 18 to 30 to stand up. Now, I probably spoke to 2,000 people that morning, and only 14 men stood up in 2 services.
Wow.
So if you contrast that with Jesus' disciples, probably 11 of the 12 were young single men aged 18 to 30. So we've definitely changed from a guy-oriented religion to a grandma-oriented religion.
Yeah. Some of that changes. Men get married and then they have kids, and then a lot of times they go to church, but they are kind of a lot of ways dragged to church by their wives sometimes. One thing that I have definitely observed is for married couples, it's typically the woman who decides where the family goes to church, and therefore, where the tithe money goes. And if she gets unhappy for any reason, they're going to switch churches. I mean, it just seems to be the case. Men seem to kind of treat religion as like, well, that's kind of her gig. And this is even in conservative denominations. Like, that's kind of her thing. It's more her thing. It's more important for her to be happy than it is for me to be happy. So I'm just going to go along with what makes her maximally comfortable, where she gets engaged. And then again, if she has a falling out with somebody in the church, and it's like, okay, now we got to move. Kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right. In most families, the religion falls under the mother's portfolio. She takes care of the kids' education. She takes care of the medical. Making sure the kids have their doctor's appointments. In a lot of families, a man would no sooner choose a church.
Okay, more from Renn's fascinating Substack. The emergence of the post-religious right. So the Republican Party's 2024 platform removed language calling for a national ban on abortion. He published this July 9, 2024. So Renn published a book called Life in the Negative World. Since the 1980s, evangelical Christians have been closely aligned with political conservatism in the Republican Party, so it's easy to conflate the prospects of evangelicalism with the prospects for Republican electoral victory. But the Republican Party is in turmoil. It has a large following. Republicans winning electoral majorities doesn't mean that evangelical Christians are a majority. So abortion restrictions are proved to be an electoral loser. They have no major donor constituency or support from other powerful interest groups. So in the pragmatic world of politics, the Republican Party is going to jettison positions like abortion restriction that cost them votes and elections. Growing numbers of people on the right are not religious or socially conservative. Right? Donald Trump's base was made up of cultural conservatives, but not social conservatives, right? Their priorities are immigration, trade, and war, not abortion and sex issues. Right? Young conservatives are more likely to be in a barstool lifestyle than anything traditional. They don't like wokeness. They don't like anti-white ideologies, anti-male ideologies. They are not interested in social conservatism. So probably most of the online dissident sphere is implicitly or explicitly hostile to Christianity. Europe offers a glimpse of what a post-religious right looks like. So the populist nationalist parties in Europe are not interested in traditional religion or morality. They may embrace secular liberal values. So talk about the French populist right. This is the Financial Times. The strong performance of the populist right party of Marine Le Pen follows a trend in Europe. The electorates shift to the right in favor of populist parties. There are two components to this support: hostility towards migrants in general and Islam in particular, and a rejection of globalization and Europe in favor of protecting a particular way of life. So you had the Yellow Vest revolt during Emmanuel Macron's first term, embodying the anti-establishment dimension of the current support for the Front National in France, the fight to preserve a certain way of life. The Yellow Vest movement was not racist or especially anti-immigration. Its target was the arrogance of the establishment. It protested against punitive environmentalism, restrictions on car use, the decay of public transport, and the growing gap between big cities and life in the periphery. So many parts of the Yellow Vest program are not that far from the populist far-left party. So in their personal lives, Western Europe's populist leaders do not exemplify traditional values. Their voters are not eager to renounce sexual freedom and toleration. Populist parties put forward a program of returning to religious norms, those that do fail in elections. The failure of the Christian right parties and the caution of populists in promoting traditional values have one simple explanation: that voters' shift to the right does not reflect a desire to return to religion. European societies are liberal. They prize sexual freedom, hedonism, and individualism. European populists are overwhelmingly secular. They're not fascinated with sacrifice, death, and glory. The culture wars that divide the U.S. are not effective in Europe or in Australia or in New Zealand. So this is a pretty good description of Donald Trump and his appeal, even though his coalition has many more religious people than the European populist right. So you have steadily increasing numbers of voters on the right with no interest in religion or social conservatism. They may use a religious Christian affiliation as an identity marker. So we are transitioning to a world that is increasingly negative to Christianity. Trump and Trumpism were only possible in an America that was hostile to Christianity.
Church than choose drapes. It's just something that women do. And unfortunately, that causes the boys who grew up in these families, they can see that religion is mom's thing. Mm-hmm. And it causes great attrition as these boys reach 12, 13, 14, and they're desperate to prove their manhood. They're going to jettison religion because they've seen that it's mom's thing and not dad's.
Right. I do think, and I'm actually planning to write about this because I really feel that men do sort of like take certain elements of the household and say, that's my wife's sphere, and I don't want to have anything to do with them. I mean, a lot of men, like their wives even buy their clothes for them. Mm-hmm. They buy everything for them. And so there was the famous Gillette ad that they did not long ago. They got a lot of pushback when it was sort of like toxic masculinity ad.
Yeah.
And one of the things I said is, probably women buy most of the shaving cream because most guys don't even pick what shaving cream they buy. And when you sort of abdicate your responsibility to even make purchasing decisions for yourself, don't be surprised when this goes like directions you don't want to do. So I certainly am a little bit on board with men are a little apathetic in some areas. I don't have the stats at the top of my head, but women control the vast bulk of consumer spending in America.
Yeah, something like 80%. Yeah.
So it's this idea that men earn, but there's this income gap. But when it comes to who spends the money in a household, the wife is certainly in control or disproportionately influential in most of the spending. And I think that was one of my takeaways from the book was the primary customer segment that Christianity targets is women. And therefore, everything is designed to attract the women, and which then attracts more women. And again, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did they serve the women because that's who was showing up, or did they choose it that way? But it does seem to be I kind of looked at your book, especially you describe it anthropological. I kind of looked at it as a business school case study. You get all the statistics on here's who's listening to Christian radio, here's who's doing this, and it's like, yeah, this is like Harvard Business School saying, yeah, they decided to target this particular, women with kids demographic, and these older women. There's like these female demographics that the church is really coming after that seems to disproportionately receive a lot of the attention because they are the people. They are the people consuming Christianity. They're the people buying all the Christian books, listening to the Christian music.
Yeah.
So in essence, they're just responding to the market. I do think there's some of that.
Well, there's a huge untapped or available market when women get an empty nest because they've suddenly.
Okay, let's have a look at what Kip's talking about. Advice I should take: join the volunteer fire department or some other man-centric civic club, perhaps one that is less legible. My friend's dad was a preacher. Whenever he invited me to church, the sermon was based on some greasy wrong turn that Kip had taken. Women see the church as a potential safety need. The marketing department at these churches need to sharpen their pencil, or men's club will become a thing of the past. All right, another essay here from Renn. Conservative elites prefer living in progressive elite cities. Many conservative elites prefer living around liberals to the average conservative voter. Vanity Fair just ran a favorable profile of the startup community in El Segundo. That's a suburb of LA near the LAX airport. All right, this is a collection of heavily conservative, pro-America Gen Z male founders looking to work on defense and other hard-tech businesses. All right, dozens of young men gather with a singular mission to save America. They want to build the next generation of great tech companies. They want to build real stuff. They have a taste for the tangible. They spend their workdays toiling in labs, manufacturing lines, their nights sleeping on couches and bunk beds. They have an outsized respect for their country and men in uniform. They love fast cars, tobacco, and their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. They are aspirationally blue-collar. They wear blue jeans, clean leather work boots, and dark T-shirts with company emblems embroidered. They trek to the Central Valley to launch drones into the airspace. At night, they drink at the Purple Orchard Tiki Lounge or at Dockweiler Beach. They chew nicotine pouches and chug energy drinks. During the 3 days I visited the companies, I saw 3 women and spoke to one. Right. Seems like these El Segundo founders are acting out a studied caricature of nostalgic Americana. On Twitter, they post about smoking cigarettes, bench pressing, and loving their country. You have to make it cool, says the co-founder. We're trying to bring more young men into manufacturing. So people are drawn to a scene. So create and maintain a scene that helps to create something real. Your scene has to produce something of real value, whether that's music or drones. You have to produce real companies with real products. Scenes tend to be ephemeral. And at the epicenter of the young, high-talent, conservative, pro-America, pro-Jesus startup community is Los Angeles. They are a neighborhood, an extremely progressive, elite coastal city in one of America's bluest states. All cities are blue cities politically and culturally. LA is an elite center of progressive wealth and culture creation. It is an elite citadel of progressivism. It is also a longtime hub of aerospace and defense. It's interesting that these conservatives don't choose a red state. And then there's Dime Square, reactionary culture and politics in New York City. And in Texas, you see a lot of the higher wattage and leading edge conservatives are moving to Austin, the bluest and most progressive city in the state. The conservative elites and their institutions are concentrated in New York and Washington and San Francisco Bay Area. Most conservative intellectual leaders do not live in red states or in red areas of blue states. Elites are drawn to elites and elite cities. If you want to be part of the elite, you need to be around other elites, and you need to be around the institutions of elite society. So there are top-tier cities. There's New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and San Francisco. If you want to influence the federal government, you have to be in Washington, D.C. Conservative elites prefer a progressive social cultural milieu. They don't want to live around your average Republican voter. They don't want to live in a highly red voting community. They want to live in or near a nice, walkable urban center with lots of shopping, dining, arts, and cultural opportunities, intellectual stimulation, and opportunities for new experiences. So IQ is positively correlated with openness. Cities are where new experiences and fashions are found. So knowledge industries become more productive in areas where talent is concentrated. So these factors draw intelligent and highly educated people to the city.
Suddenly got money, because their husbands are probably, or, they may have retired from work, or their husbands may have a good income in their 50s. That's typically when we have peak earning power, and they have no children to care for. Well, those maternal instincts don't go away. And I think, good-hearted women redirect their maternal energies into the church, through the nursery, through the youth group, through benevolences. And this is a good thing on its face. The danger comes when in the denominations that have female elders and leaders, they bring those maternal energies to the leadership of the church, and they make grandma-type decisions. Well, there's this gay couple that wants to get married in our church, and I know what the Bible says, but they're just such lovely people. And, Jesus would love them. He would say yes to their, and so we get a softening of doctrine. And, from the kindest heartedness, from the best motivation, wanting to be kind to people, doctrine softens. And then you go down the road to theological adventurism, liberalism, and then that's a death knell for your church, because young families don't want to raise their children in a church that's theologically ambiguous. They're not looking for a youth leader who says, hey, you need to go out and experiment with your sexuality. Right. Or, hey, transgenderism is fantastic. You ought to try it. That's not the message most parents are looking for when they're looking for a church.
That's why a lot of people go back to church when they have kids, because they want their kids kind of indoctrinated in traditional morality, basically.
Moral scruples. Yeah, even liberal, even the most liberal parents don't choose like transgender youth leaders. I ran a Google search for openly gay youth leader, transgender youth leader. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find a single church in America, even among the the way out lefty churches. They're not because parents won't put up with it. Parents are looking for moral certainty for their kids. They're looking for bedrock principles that they can build their lives on. And these squishy, ambiguous women-led churches, and they're almost all women-led, just don't stick with the rules. They stick with relationships.
Yeah, now I know it's not always.
All right, Tim Alberta, man of the left, but moderately fair. He came out with a new book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism. And Aaron Renn read a review about it for the Claremont Review of Books. So he says there's a tradition among American conservatives of abandoning the movement in disgust at the religious right. So that was part of Michael Lynn's break with it in the mid-1990s, which he described in his book, Up From Conservatism, Why the Right is Wrong for America. Famed Republican strategist Kevin Phillips bemoaned the influence of evangelicals during the second George W. Bush administration in American Theocracy, 2006. Same year, former First Thing senior editor Damon Linker wrote The Theocons, Secular America Under Siege. Now we have Atlantic magazine staff writer Tim Alberta, an evangelical son of an evangelical pastor, and a reporter for National Review, provides the latest installment in this series with his new book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism. It is a Jeremiad against evangelical support for Donald Trump. It is a glowing portrayal of the minority of evangelical leaders working to undermine that support. It gives numerous stories of pro-Trump evangelicals behaving badly, such as former Liberty University President Jerry Falwell Jr., who operated the school like a dictatorship. Tim Alberta visits the American Restoration Tour, a hybrid revival and GOP pep rally designed to convince people that we're losing the country. He attends the church of Pastor Greg Locke, who has called Joe Biden a sex-trafficking, demon-possessed mongrel. So Tim Alberta argues that evangelicals have made deals with the devil. Too many of them worship America rather than Christ. They fail to follow biblical commands to love others and not be racist. And Tim Alberta sees many Southern Baptists in particular as in thrall to conspiracy theories. So this is a deeply hostile book to most of American evangelical Christians. Right, his book is mostly a collection of vignettes. It is not data-driven. It is not systematic. He cherry-picks the most egregious examples. American evangelicalism is flawed. It is dominated by charismatic figures who rule over their organizations like feudal lords. So if someone's charismatic, there's at least a 50% chance that they are a fraud. See, I deliberately dial my charisma down so that I don't defraud you. I mean, I could at any time, I could just start dialing the charisma up and money would start flowing out of your pockets and you would be amazed at the pseudo-profundity of my insights, and I would enlist you in a war against evil and on the side of good, and we're going to take back America. We will fight the elites. I'm fighting for you. I'm on your side. But I deliberately tone down my charisma on this show. I deliberately keep the numbers down, just a small elite community. I deliberately make tremendous efforts to avoid being particularly good at live streaming. I force myself to stumble over my words. I have to force myself to drone at you. I have to force myself to play all sorts of videos that you're not interested in. I have to force myself to come up with topics that will annoy and repel any possible audience, right? I have to put so much effort into denying my own charisma. I hope you appreciate that. So many evangelical leaders are hucksters who exploit their flock, have unseemly levels of wealth. Righteous Gemstones. Anyone watch that? I've been highly recommended it. Haven't gotten into it yet. Many evangelical Christians promote conspiracy theories. There are more people in the prosperity gospel movement and other dodgy corners of Pentecostalism than evangelicals would like to admit. Evangelicals have become too tightly connected to the Republican Party. It's more of a cultural identity than a religious one. So in this book, Tim Alberta portrays the anti-Trump evangelicals like David French and Russell Moore, the good guys, with one-dimensional hagiography. Doesn't mention that one of them was in a major plagiarism scandal with over 100 sermons copied from others without attribution. His portrayal of the anti-Trumpers is a photographic negative of the pro-Trumpers he decries. But Tim Alberta's anti-Trumpers are also fighting a cultural war, only theirs is internal to the church, waged against more conservative evangelicals. They too believe they are engaged in a Manichaean struggle between good and evil, and they too worship America, as shown in David French's table pounding over the First Amendment. So in his own apocalyptic style and over-the-top denunciations of pro-Trump evangelicals in the book and in articles, Tim Alberta resembles the very people he castigates. He too believes America faces a mortal threat. On Christmas Day 2023, he warned in an Atlantic column of the danger Christian nationalism poses to the future of America. He uses disease metaphors to describe pro-Trump evangelicals, terms like contagion and depollute. He writes in the book, Pro-Trump American evangelicals cannot let go. Well, neither can he. Touts himself as an evangelical. He starts each chapter with a quotation from Scripture. He expounds Christian theology. He uses Greek words from the New Testament. He confidently states, when Jesus walked the earth, he went out of his way to minister to the broken and the shunned. He didn't show mere mercy to the adulterer and the prostitute and the tax collector. He showed favoritism towards them. He lays out his own theological justification for ordaining female pastors. When it comes to matters like abortion, he doesn't operate this way. He sees that abortion is just a personal choice. He carefully avoids admitting that Christian doctrine conflicts with any liberal secular elite positions or that he holds any views that conflict with them. His book is crafted to appeal to those elites, confirm them in their pre-existing hatred of conservative evangelicals, positioning their own values as the proper Christian thing to do. He omits cases and information that complicate his narrative. He denies that those who oppose shutting down churches over COVID did so on rational and legal grounds. He could have owned up to the liberal political behavior among many evangelicals. All right, 100% of the political donations from 2015 to 2022 by staff members at Christianity Today, the flagship magazine for evangelicalism, went to Democrats. So Tim Alberta's book is ultimately yet another piece of evangelical writing. It ardently criticizes conservative evangelicals in a liberal secular forum using arguments aligned with the liberal secular elite. It's not going to spur any positive reforms among conservative evangelicals.
It's the case that these churches are like that. You know, when I lived in New York, I visited Hillsong Church there a few times, and they've had some challenges recently. But they had 5 or 6 services a day, all packed. Sometimes you'd have to stand in line to get in. You have to sit in an overflow room. And I went to the 10 a.m. service, which I think might be their oldest congregation. It's like the one where you bring your parents from out of town. But the median age was like 24.
Yeah.
I felt like, man, I shouldn't be here. They're going to try to they're going to arrest me or something, especially since I'm wearing a trench coat and it was raining.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of guys. There were a lot of single guys, and they're very obviously it was overwhelmingly single. So some churches are attracting men, but that's one of my barometers that I use. I've learned some rules of thumb for like judging various aspects of a church. Like one of the things I've discovered is you can kind of position a church theologically just by listening to the announcements. If the announcements are primarily about service opportunities, it's a very liberal church. If it's primarily about internal church activities, it's a much more conservative church. So are they talking about Bible studies and stuff like that, or are they talking about the soup kitchen? And so, you should probably be talking about both, but you could kind of like sense where people are on the spectrum just by that. And that's one thing I look at. Does this church have any younger single adult men in it? And, there's this Lutheran church, in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America by my apartment in New York. I went there one day. They have a great liturgy. They do all the Bach, cantatas and the correct liturgy. I mean, they're really amazing. And it was actually a pretty well patronized congregation. A lot of young fans. But I look, man, I don't see any younger single men anywhere. I didn't see one. I'm like, so that tells you there's something not healthy in the demographics, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, liberal churches believe that we transform the world and that transforms hearts. Evangelical churches, we transform hearts and that transforms the world. It's that we both believe the same things. It's just a question of which is primary, which comes first. So I think that's what you're describing, that you can tell the church's theology by whether they're focused on transforming individual hearts, which is the more evangelical approach, or are they out doing world transformation through good works? I think for men, particularly young men, and you've read all the mythopoetic literature, Iron John and all that stuff. There is a process through which young men have to die and be reborn. And that's the heart transformation. That's why evangelical churches, particularly mega churches that focus on heart transformation first, are much more appealing to young men than these older churches that are focused solely on good works. Because a young man's greatest need is to be transformed from a boy into a man, from an irresponsible child into a responsible man. And so churches that preach that sort of message, you can be born again, are much more appealing to those than say, hey, we just need to go out and do a soup kitchen.
One of your great lines, you quote somebody in the book, you say, a wise Texan once told me, men don't go to church because they've been. And I thought that was a good one. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the attributes that you flag as turnoffs to men in church. And I'll start with the music. You mentioned K-Love, like the radio network. Tell us about K-Love.
Well, a few years back, I had a chance to interview the program director at K-Love, and he openly admitted that 67% of their listeners were female and just 33 were male. Among adults, that is. You can't account for boys who are strapped to the back of the minivan. They don't count. But among adults, it was 2/3 women. Up to 85% of the Christian products are bought by women. Over 80% of the non-ordained staff in church, that would be church secretaries, lay staff and stuff, are female. So, yeah, there's definitely, men may have the pulpit. They may control what we would call the upper echelon or the highest leadership positions of the church, but they are generals leading an army of women.
Yeah, when I've listened to some K-Love, and to me, it's like light rock love songs to Jesus.
Yeah,
and I actually do think that kind of Christian music, light rock music, and country music, country pop music, are all made by the same people in Nashville. It's like the same group of people. They're all sort of the exact same song. There's just a few tweaks on them in terms of what they are.
I'll jump in there. It's not just K-Love. It's many Christian radios use a liner that sounds something like this: "Safe for the whole family." That's their tagline. That's their marketing promise: "Safe for the whole family." And boys, it's just poisoning boys' hearts because they're driving around in the backseat of the minivan year after year, listening to their mom playing K-Love on the radio or whatever the local Christian radio station, talking about how safe Christianity is. Now, that's wonderful for mom because what does she want for her children? The whole reason she's driving a minivan with 16 airbags is because she's into safety, right? What a boy is into when they're 13 and 14 years old. I mean, we're planting this time bomb in their hearts that the moment they get to that age where they want to throw safety to the wind, for 13 years, they've been sitting in the back of the van hearing how safe Christianity is. And so we're just telling them, please reject this because this is all about your mom and this is not about you. Christianity is a car seat. It's something that keeps you safe. And boy, that is absolutely the wrong message to be teaching to young men.
Yeah, I mean, you just listen to these songs and these lyrics. Like, there's this one Hillsong tune. It's the greatest of all romance. They call it. These are like literal love songs to Jesus. And you can take a lot of the Hillsong ones, for example. You take a song like Oceans.
Astronauts has been called off. Let's go live to Kennedy Space Center, where Fox News senior correspondent Jonathan Seri is standing by. Jonathan, what happened?
Yeah, Laura, NASA officials say that it was a hydraulic issue on one of the clamps that helps hold the rocket.
With Vice President J.D. Vance at the White House, nothing's off the table.
How many more New Yorkers will you detain? How many more New Yorkers without charge? Do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe in the First Amendment, Tom Homan?
Homan derangement syndrome. It's real.
They can hate me all they want. We're coming. I said I'm going to bring hell. I meant it.
He is trying to end what the Founding Fathers were pretty smart about. Combine that with the power of the oligarchy. These are the scariest times in my lifetime.
Democrats and the big O.
Oh, yeah? You want to fucking go, Karen? No! No! Until Black Lives Matter! Until Black Lives Matter, no life matters! Black, white, yellow... That is not our fight! Until Black lives mean something to this country! No. No. She ain't going nowhere, though. She's not going nowhere. Until Black...
Okay, what do we got here? Odie but goody.
Do Black Lives matter to you? Do Black Lives matter to you? Do Black Lives matter, all right, Karen? Fucking white piece of shit, you little fucking cussy-ass bitch! Oh, yeah? You want to fucking go, Karen? No! No! Until Black Lives matter! Until Black Lives matter, no life matters! Black, white, yellow... That is not our fight! Until Black lives mean something to this country! No. No.
Whose lives matter? Tell me, whose lives matter? Tell me. Tell me.
Until Black... What you going to do? You're not going nowhere. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter.
Powerful. I can't listen to that video too much. Oh. Good stuff, mate. Good stuff. Okay, here we go.
How many more New Yorkers without charge? Do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe in the First Amendment, Tom Homan?
Homan derangement syndrome. Welcome to Jesse Waters Prime Time tonight.
How many more New Yorkers will you detain? How many more New Yorkers without charge? Do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe in the First Amendment, Tom Homan?
Homan derangement syndrome. It's real.
They can hate me all they want. We're coming. I said I'm going to bring hell. I meant it.
He is trying to end what the Founding Fathers were pretty smart about. Combine that with the power of the oligarchy. These are the scariest times in my lifetime.
Democrats and the big O.
It just turns your stomach.
Barack went from a state senator to a U.S. senator, and next thing you know, people were saying this guy should run for president.
I was definitely like, nope, no way, this is crazy.
What's going on with Michelle and Barry?
He was, as I call, a swerver.
Plus,
I'm trying to stay focused, but I'm very impressed with the VP's.
today, inflation dropped to its lowest level in 3.5 years. Illegal border crossings are now down to about zero. Gas is back down to below $3 a gallon. Mortgage rates have dropped for 6 straight weeks. Jobs are up. Unemployment's down. $2 trillion in private money is being invested in America. DEI is dead. The government's more efficient. And Ukraine's agreed to a ceasefire. But Bernie Sanders says he's scared.
These are, the scariest times in my lifetime. That's all. I mean, I think that's objectively the truth. He is now trying to end what the Founding Fathers were pretty smart about, creating a form of government where there were checks and balances, a legislative body, an executive body, and a judiciary.
What is Bernie, like 100? He's lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, 9/11, COVID, and he's scared of the Golden Age? No. When Hillary told him to drop out or else, that was scarier. But even scarier is being stranded in outer space. Biden left 2 astronauts floating around up there. Elon offered to save them last year, but Biden said no. He didn't want Musk getting credit for the rescue, so he just let him hover. And now, 9 months later, Elon's sending a rocket up to bring him home. But Bernie's mad Musk has the money for the rocket.
You know, it is not just they want to give tax breaks to billionaires and cut programs for working people. Frankly, that's happened before. Yeah. But you combine that with the power of the oligarchy in general. You combine that with Mr. Musk owning Twitter and able to send out his messages to hundreds of millions of people. It's not only the power of money, it's also combined with that the movement toward authoritarianism.
Elon saving stranded astronauts with SpaceX, saving Ukraine with Starlink, and saving free speech with X. But Bernie's mad Musk's megaphone is bigger than his. It's not the size of the megaphone, Bern. It's what you say into it. And what are these programs for working people Musk's cutting? Could it be the $750,000 to examine social networks among Black and Latino sexual minority men in New Jersey? Or $700,000 to study cannabis use among sexual minority gender diverse individuals? $100,000 for assessing sexual health for gay Latinos in the agriculture community? $600,000 for teen pregnancy prevention for trans boys. Thank God. No more boys are getting pregnant. It's an epidemic. Democrats used to be down with Doge.
Yes, you do have to cut some programs. I think there's waste out there. I think there are programs that can and should be cut.
Again, we all agree we have to get rid of waste, fraud, abuse, duplication, obsolescence, and the rest. The GAO has given us a blueprint for that, and we subscribe to that. We all agree that we must reduce the deficit.
There's tremendous waste in government, and I think any Democrat who ignores the lessons, the lessons of those who voted, the lessons of the last election, makes a mistake. The people did want government to cut out the waste and to shrink.
Everything Trump does, Democrats must oppose. Got to oppose Doge. They must restore teen boy pregnancy prevention. Trump made Democrats hate EVs. Getting behind the wheel of a Tesla, you're now Adolf.
All of that. And you end it with, I love Tesla. But you know what? It's an honest mistake. He just mixed up the two words most associated with Elon Musk, Tesla and Hitler.
Adam Schiff's whip, a Tesla. Now he says it's his biggest regret, not the Russia hoax, the car. Senator Mark Kelly's putting his Tesla up for sale. Democrats are like teenage girls. If they don't like you and you like something, then they can't like it. Even if they liked it before, now they have to hate it. Teslas are getting their tires slashed and spray painted with swastikas. And liberals are torching Tesla charging stations and hurling Molotov cocktails at dealerships. But the media says that Molotov cocktail was mostly peaceful.
Overnight have this post claiming that protests at Tesla dealerships are illegal. He said today he would label violence against dealerships domestic terrorism. So just to be clear, you protest a private company, you are labeled by this administration a domestic terrorist. You show up at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th with the intent to overturn a fair and free election, and you get a pardon.
47 went green, bought an electric car. He's saving the planet. That's what they tell us. Nope. It made Chuck sick.
Just turns your stomach at what they do to help one another. What do you think Americans think of that when they see Trump pushing Elon Musk, the richest man in the world's Teslas? A man born with a limousine who for the rest of his life will be driven by Secret Service was supposedly buying a new car and checking out his EV options. What a joke.
He turned the White House into a car show trying to help put a floor under the plummeting stock value of Elon Musk's Tesla.
You know what turns my stomach? Watching Schumer grill. An American president buys an American car that liberals love, and Democrats don't like it. Shady Kazakhstanis gave the vice president's son an electric car. He didn't like it, so he turned it in, and the same shady Kazakhstani bought him a Porsche. That didn't turn Chuck's stomach then, and neither did Joe flying Hunter to China and coming back with bags of cash. And Coons thinks it's suspect to turn the White House into a car show. The Wrangler Biden's promoting isn't even American. The Dutch own it. Obama and Biden let Jeep get sold overseas, and he's driving a foreign car around the White House lawn. During an EV summit, he invited every electric car maker except Tesla. Joe snubbed Musk, the largest EV maker in the world. And then he sued Musk for not hiring migrants. The Democrats and Musk had a bad breakup. You know how these are. They used to be in love.
We're going to try to see if we can accelerate this kind of collaboration through what we put forward. So
it's the right plan.
Good. Well, congratulations. This is terrific.
Thank you very much.
How's the car doing?
It's doing great, actually.
Yeah? How do you split your time between car and rocket?
Well, it's usually about 50-50. We should have the sedan on the roads in 2 years. And it'll be the best car on the roads by far.
Musk didn't change. Democrats did. He's always believed in free speech and free enterprise. He didn't make his money shorting the pound like Soros so we could use it to open our border and prisons. He's making cars that liberals say save the planet and trying to put rockets on other planets. The progressives hate that Musk's making progress. And they hate that he's young and fun and not in the shadows like their sugar daddy Soros. Again, like a teenage girl, they blackballed Elon, and then he became even more popular. And now they hate him, but they really hate themselves for losing him.
Forgive me, but what's his end game? I mean, I know look, he wants to be the first trillionaire in the world. I mean, what's his end game here?
Well, you know it. You guys, you created him a governor. I mean, you
By
guys.
the way, in many respects, California did. It was our regulatory process and our subsidies to create this market. You're 100% right. I think you're right.
Democrats loaned Musk billions to make green cars, and he actually did it. Unlike all the other dumb loans Democrats gave out to all the green companies that went belly up, like Solyndra and Sonova and that stupid electric bus company that Kamala's always yapping about. All Democrats do once they get into power is hand wealthy people money. They bail out banks, give donors green contracts. But suddenly, some wealthy guys go into government to shut down the fraud and handouts, and the media is mad.
President Trump is surrounded by the wealthiest cabinet, the wealthiest administration in modern U.S. history. Does this concern you?
I don't think it's so much about their wealth.
I mean, you're only allowed to be wealthy in Congress. Can't be wealthy in the cabinet. We know how Elon made his money. How'd Nancy? Elon makes cars and rockets. What does Hunter make? No one wants his paintings now that Daddy's back in Delaware. What a coincidence. So it seems like the Democrats finally settled on a message to beat Trump. It's taken them long enough. Republicans are for the rich. Where have I heard that before? Oh, they've been saying it for 100 years. Maybe it used to work, but now the Democrats are the party of the rich. Billionaires donated more to Kamala than Trump. She outraised him 2-1, and he still cleaned her clock. Under Joe Biden, income inequality increased, and the Democrats and their shutdowns created the biggest transfer of wealth in world history. Zuckerberg, Musk, Bezos, Gates made more money under Biden than ever. And that's great. We're all for making money. It's just not great when the rest of the country can't get ahead. Liberals used to love these billionaires until they switched sides.
You guys you loved all the oligarchs, and particularly Elon, until they flipped. And remember, all the rest of these oligarchs were all progressive Democrats until 11 p.m.
I don't know they're progressive. I refer to them as libertarian, and I know these guys intimately, known them for decades.
If Trump's doing all these favors for billionaires, why are the billionaires losing money under him? Well, because he's fighting a trade war to rebalance the economy to save the American worker. Elon has lost $100 billion since he teamed up with Trump. And he says it's worth it if he can stop the country from going bankrupt.
So it's a call to action. You're hearing a call to action.
Yeah.
You giving up your other stuff? I mean, how are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty. Yeah, I mean.
But there's no turning back, you're saying.
I'm just here trying to make government more efficient, eliminate waste and fraud, and so far we're making good progress.
The party's flipped. Democrats are for the rich. The Trump Republicans are for everybody. And that has the Democrats rattled. The America First movement forced Democrats into hating peace, progress, and making things in America. They're even against black kids with cancer who want to grow up to be cops. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, joins me now. So the Elon-Democrat relationship's quite interesting.
Okay, do Black Lives Matter to you? Karen, do Black Lives Matter to you? Do Black Lives Matter to you?
To you!
Do Black Lives
Do Black
Matter?
Lives Matter to you? Do Black Lives Matter to you? Do Black Lives Matter, all right, Karen? Fucking white piece of shit, you little fucking pussy-ass bitch! Oh, yeah? You wanna fucking go, Karen? No! No! Until Black Lives Matter! Until Black Lives Matter, no life matters!
Black, white, yellow...
That is not our fight! Until Black lives mean something to this country! No. No.
She ain't going nowhere, though. She's not going nowhere.
Until Black...
What you going to do? She's not going nowhere. Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Do Black Lives Matter to you?
Bye-bye.
Do Black Lives Matter to you? Do Black Lives Matter, all right, Karen? Fucking white piece of shit, you little fucking pussy-ass bitch! Oh, yeah? You wanna fucking go, Karen?